awesome. All right, gang. Well, I think we're in a pretty good spot. As people shuffle in, there's no reason for those that came here at the start time to not carry on. So everybody, thanks for another episode. If you didn't have the chance, we actually did our first episode of the film Hang earlier this last week. We focused on a film that was very near and dear to Chris here, which was Amadeus by Milos Forman. If you have not seen that, you can actually watch it for free right now on the Filmmakers Academy platform or on our YouTube channel at The Film Hang. This goes for everybody. Please like, subscribe, follow. We're on Instagram, Twitch, YouTube. We're still building those pages out, so this is a work in process. But Chris, how you feeling after our first one?
I'm good, you know, the feedback has been really nice, you know, even if it was pretty much my wife just telling me that it was really good. Like, it's been really cool. It's been nice that we had a lot of views on it. And yeah, people were coming out with their ideas, which was great. And lots of people talking about different things. And yeah, if you've not seen the film, it's quite cool to watch that either before or after it, and then have your own opinions and write them in the comments, because we do read them. And, you know, even if you think our views aren't great, then feel free to put your own in there, because I like just talking film with people. And like, what's been really cool about starting this and starting with one of my favorite films is we could have talked for like 5 hours about it, but we kept ourselves to 2, and we talked a lot about Amadeus, and we talked about the characters, we talked about Milos Forman and how much of a dude he is, and it was just great fun. You know, we didn't even get into talking about the soundtrack and the fact that they used all Mozart music. We didn't even get into any of that stuff. And we could have, but we kept ourselves chased. We kept ourselves on the 2-hour mark, and we did it. I think with this one, we're probably going to go over, but like, I don't mind, because there's so much in this and there's so many different elements to it. And I think if we could connect Amadeus to this, we could probably say that Mozart, if you ever look back at any of his music that he wrote, one of the interesting things is he wrote one of his most famous pieces of music is called The Magic Flute, Die Zauberflöte, right? And that was all inspired by the Masons and the secret societies of the Masons and the different things that they did. And if you ever watch it, or if you ever listen to the music, it's very, very veiled in symbology and stuff like that, which is exactly what this is. So we can call this Kubrick's Die Zauberflöte, or Kubrick's Magic Flute, because he got some insight into secret society and decided to talk about it and put it into his film.
That's so well said, Chris. And hey, we've got a lot of people tuning in for this episode. So like we said, tonight's going to be about Eyes Wide Shut. We already have a really awesome comment here from the Movie Cube, who got to meet Alan Cumming once, who was in this movie's Eyes Wide Shut. Really awesome character. He said he auditioned with an American accent, and Kubrick was surprised when Alan was on set and spoke with his actual accent. Alan said it was called acting, Stanley, which is very funny. I definitely want to follow through, because we're going to have to talk about that character. So everyone, we're going to kick this sucker off. We got a presentation we put together here, and there is definitely a lot to discuss.
Oh yeah.
Let me put this into presenter mode. So as Chris was saying, we love movies. Chris is an awesome film director and writer. I'm a film director and writer as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. And the Film Hang is meant to be this place where we can just share movies, create a live stream, and not just a post, not just a book, something that actually brings people together. And this is all about discovery. We're not authorities in this space. We want this to be as you guys are doing research with us, sharing your ideas, sharing what you're seeing, correcting us if we might have got something wrong, because that's the whole point of cinema. It's about discussion. And if there's one movie that deserves that discussion, and Kubrick, being that we're talking about him, every single one of his films does, and I see him just having a series in its own right. But Eyes Wide Shut is a film from 1999 that we're going to do a deep dive into. And we really want this to be a balanced discussion, because there's a lot of conspiracy, there's a lot of conversation. This film is nearing 27 years old now, so it's about a quarter of a century old, and there's a lot of things that have happened since this film was released into now, and the current state of the world, and what we know about politics and the world around us. I think Kubrick, as he always was very much ahead of his time. And I think today this will be a fun discussion. We want this to be fun, equal parts educational for those that are part of this community and want to study film because you're in the film industry. This is a home for you. For those that just love cinema and want to learn more about the awesome movies that have come out in this industry, this place is for you. If you just like hearing people talk, this place is for you. So without further ado, here's kind of the look of tonight. We're going to have an introduction, of course, talk about the movie. We're going to go through the cast and crew, go through some of the pivotal roles and those that helped Kubrick make this film possible. Of course, the story, Eyes Wide Shut, is so much about the story and its source material. We have the conspiracy. I think everybody knows about the conspiracy, at least one shape or another, for this. And there's a lot of conspiracy and mystery, for that matter, that goes around this film. Obviously, losing a master. Kubrick is no longer with us. He passed on March 7th, 1999, which we're going to get into. But this is also an ode to him as such a maverick of his time in filmmaker and someone who defined 20th century art. I think that's going to be a really great discussion. Themes, we'll spend some time there. And of course, scene breakdown. So definitely strap up, use the bathroom, grab a snack, because we're going to be doing a very long session. But I think, you know what, I'll say this, Chris. I first watched this movie back in 2010. So this was 10 years from the launch. And I didn't really know Kubrick back then. I was a big fan of movies. I, of course, saw some of the greats. And then I watched A Clockwork Orange. I watched Eyes Wide Shut. And I remember this film really standing out to me. And for the last, if that was 2010, for the last 17, 16 years, I've been studying this film on and off. And I feel like I'm actually at a place where I understand the world a little bit better to speak to this movie. How do you feel about that? When did you first watch this?
I think I was about 19, because I wasn't allowed into the cinema to see it. Like it came out when I was like 13 years old, right? And at that time I was sneaking into The Matrix, which was like in the same year. And I remember like not literally sneaking into The Matrix like the film, right? But like I snuck into The Matrix because I wasn't old enough. I wasn't 15 yet. And in the UK, they have like, it's PG, then it goes 12 rated. So you have to be over 12 years old to watch it. Then 15 and then 18 rated. So that's how it works. I know in the US it's like R rated and 17 and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like in the UK, you couldn't watch this because obviously all the nudity, right? Then you couldn't watch it till you're 18. So I think I watched it when I was first at university. So sort of like 2004, right? And it was one of those where it was like, kind of, you watched it on your own, didn't you? Because you didn't know, like, you'd heard all these things about, oh yeah, lots of naked people in it. So yeah, like I had to watch it kind of secretively without my mum and dad knowing a thing. You know what I mean? And then you find out that it's actually got a lot of nuance to it. And it's not just about nudity, but my mum and dad aren't film people. They just see it as, you're watching like porn.
Yeah. And that's what I feel like was the misconception of this film. And we're going to talk about that exactly, the reception, what people thought. Knowing Kubrick had died and this film was about to come out, there was so much anticipation around this movie. And what's really awesome is, my dad was a cinephile and he brought me to a lot of movies when I was a kid every single weekend. And, 1999, I mean, I was in kindergarten when this movie came out. I was watching things like The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring and stuff like that. That would have come out in 2000. Yeah. So wow. I don't think I was quite the age demographic for this film, but I recently spoke with my father, who I think I've watched almost every Kubrick movie with. And to this day, I came to find out that he got to see this in theaters, which, is not that big of a deal. But to me, it's like, dude, you like did your mission. You went out there, you saw Eyes Wide Shut in theaters. You know how much I would love to have that moment with how like palpable it probably was with the crowd, knowing that Kubrick's final film in theaters. So yeah, for those, and it seems like some others, Zach Parker here actually got to see it in theaters. It sounds like at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard here in Los Angeles, which is really great. And yeah, if you guys have any awesome stories about your time with Eyes Wide Shut, please drop that in the chat. We want to go through those. And again, thanks for everybody that showed up. Chris and I, we just want to really create this space. And that's where we're going to talk about the film Haigh. For those, this is the first time you've tapped in. The goal is we're two filmmakers where we want to talk a movie once a week. Want it to be as simple as that. We're going to do deep dives, try to put together as much of a presentation as we can, and give our best efforts to speak to not only the artistry, the craftsmanship, the crew members involved, the intentionality of the film, the reception. There's so much that goes into filmmaking that we want it to be more than just Kubrick's the best director ever and look how brilliant he is. No, let's actually break it down and pull this apart.
Yeah.
So Chris, I don't know if yeah. And Chris, honestly, no, he is the best. He is the GOAT. I think runner-up might be when he, unfortunately, if not if, when he passes, Martin Scorsese, I think he could easily go down as the best director potentially of all time, but we'll have to see. That's definitely a debate for another day, but this is the Film Hang, and we're super excited about that. And please join in for these live sessions. We're going to try to do them once a week, and we're super stoked about that. Co-hosts, I'll speak for myself. I'm Brendan Sweeney. I'm a director, producer. I've lived in Los Angeles for 10 years now. I'm also the CEO of Filmmakers Academy, which is an online educational platform. For those that are watching platform side, this is what we love to do. We love to bring education affordably to people, and we love to bring community together, and we love to just celebrate film for what it is. So if you're on the YouTube side or Twitch, make sure to check out Filmmakers Academy. And I also run another company called Lost Objects with my wife, which is all about social media, making social media marketing accessible. We see how many amazing filmmakers, film businesses, creative businesses struggle with marketing themselves. And our goal, again, is to make those resources more accessible. I love this industry. A big goal of mine is to continue have it growing, innovating, seeing this stuff happen. And I hope that we see more of that. But Chris, who are you?
Yeah, well, I talked about it last week, so those of you who weren't here, you could watch it on there, but otherwise, just a quick one on me. So I host Finding the Frame, the podcast that's on Filmmakers Academy, where we interview lots of DPs and lots of directors and lots of people who are involved in editing and different parts of filmmaking and stuff, and just find out about them. So I host that probably once a month or something like that. And then at the same time, I write taglines for movie posters. So I get sent scripts for things like, I don't know, I did Materialists, I did Mountainhead, I did some for One Battle After Another, and lots of other films as well. But basically, I write taglines. So I get sent the script, or I get sent a clip, or I get sent a little synopsis of what the film is. And then I just write a bunch of taglines, and then they pick one from it, or they don't, and that's what I do. So I've got lots of rejected ones, which I really like, that are somewhere in the back of my computer. But yeah, some of them get picked. I mean, the Mountainhead one was really cool with Steve Carell in it. That was on the side of the HBO building. Brendan sent me a picture because he lives near there. And yeah, that's what I do in my daily work. And sometimes I'll PA on shoots. I've just done Michael. The Michael Jackson biopic, which is going to be massive. They've just released their trailer and it looks immense. And also, I've just done a bit on Jumanji as well. So some cool stuff. And that's what I do. But yeah, I love film. I came over here from the UK in about 2018. I absolutely love movies. And I grew up on like Ken Loach and British social realist films. But yeah, I've always been a massive fan of film, and I've always wanted to talk to people about it. And whenever Brendan and I get together, whenever we're at his house, or whenever we're just hanging out on set, or whenever we're at Filmmakers Academy, we get drawn into talking about film to the point where we don't get any other work done. So we thought, well, why don't we just do it on a Sunday and have a Sunday hang or a Tuesday night hang or whenever we fancy hanging, and we'll just put it live and we'll talk about film and films that we love. And there's loads. So if you guys ever want to tell us what you think we should talk about, I know somebody last week was talking about Parasite, and there was lots of other people talking about other films. Tell us what you want us to review or talk about or analyze or discuss, and we'll do it, because we love film as much as you guys do, and we want to grow this community. I mean, like, that's the key thing. We know that at the moment, film is going through this kind of like, it's difficult to get people out to the theaters, and it's difficult to get people, enjoying film again. And we think there's going to be a new renaissance, and we want to be at the heart of it. We want to be part of bringing people together who are filmmakers or just film fans or are involved in film in some crazy way. I've got friends who are in VFX who are watching and stuff like that. Whatever you are involved in, whatever part you want to play in film, come here, talk to us about it, hang out with us. And that's it. That's everything, really. I've given you the whole history of me, the whole history of things, and I'm grateful to Brendan and Filmmakers Academy and Lost Objects for hosting us and for having us on here, because without them, we couldn't do it.
Well said, well said. And to, like Chris said, this is presented by Lost Objects Filmmakers Academy. Make sure to check them out. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube. We're always trying to make this content accessible. That goes a long way. And let's hop into it. This, of course, goes without being said, but this is for educational use only. We do not own the rights to this material. We just want to speak to it, share to it. And yeah, that's that. Obviously, we love this movie, and we're not going to try to do anything to slander it in any capacity, but this is an education only event. And of course, we did not work on this movie. We do not know Kubrick. We do not know Larry Smith. We did a lot of research through various outlets, whether it's books, podcasts, watching the movie itself. And this is all just our best judgment and what we see. And like we said, let's follow along, do research parallel to us, correct us if there's something we might have said wrong or didn't realize. We love to learn in real time. We're not authorities, and we just want to be able to create a space for everybody.
Yeah, like Brendan was telling me, like, sorry. Yeah, Brendan was telling me, like, you know, when we're talking about film, Brendan says to me, like, oh yeah, how about this? And he'll send me a clip, or he'll send me like a link to something. That's kind of what we want you guys to do, because there'll be things that we haven't seen. There'll be shots, there'll be behind the scenes, there'll be things that we haven't witnessed. So send it over, because that's what we want to see.
There's so much research. And to speak to some of the source materials, I'm actually going to drop this in the comments real quick and just do a quick run through of where you guys, after this presentation is over, to get curious, because there is a ton here. Of course, there's the new Blu-rays that you can get. There's books. There's a ton of stuff. And I'm going to be dropping them one by one here in the chat real quick. And then I want to run through that. You know, there's a podcast in particular that I want to credit the most that I just dropped. If you don't know Judge Movies, he actually just made his catalog free, and it's episode 4 with Eyes Wide Shut. And this was one of the most succinct perspectives about this movie that I've personally seen. Now, there's a lot of different ideas and concepts, you know, that have been shared not only by the Kubrick estate, but by people like us who just love cinema that want to speak to it. But I highly recommend checking out this podcast, because this was the first time after watching this movie many years ago that I almost had an aha moment. Not that some of these things weren't apparent, but it really shows how much Kubrick packs into a movie. And I'm going to continue sharing these links here, just to be able to click through these. Make sure to save them. Some of them are really awesome. Obviously, make sure to read the original source material, and I'll hold up some of the hard copy stuff so you guys can see this as well. So the source material that I went into is, of course, the script. I have an awesome Warner Brothers printed this back in the day with both the original book and the script. If you haven't read the script, highly recommend that. Super easy to find online. There's also different versions of the script. Supposedly, there was one still kept in with the narration that Kubrick wanted to have in the film, was not able to do until, because unfortunately he died. If you guys don't know this and love really awesome books about filmmakers, there is an awesome series called Conversations with Filmmakers. This one happens to be on Kubrick, but I have one on Herzog, Scorsese, any director, David Lynch, you think about it. And what's great about these books is they'll compile, whether it's a written interview, a video interview, just any type of interview that was done with the filmmaker. They compile this into a book so you can read them in order based on the films as they release. And what I like about that, not that I don't love reading, you know, someone's theories on a movie, but this is very much from the mouth of the filmmaker. And I always think it's really good to start there when you're studying a film. And
definitely,
that book and that series, if you don't know it, you can get it on Amazon. It's not super expensive, but that has always been my tried and true reference, because it's me getting as close as I can to the filmmaker to hear about them. This book,
hey, Sweeney, just close off the presentation so I can see those pictures of that. Yeah, those. Then I can see them bigger, because it's easier then. Oh yeah, there it is.
Is it closed off now?
Yeah, it's closed off. I can see the books. It's nice.
Okay, great. So everyone knows this book, probably on every bookshelf, The Archive. Awesome book. Not going to spend too much time with this, but if you don't have it, want to say released in 2019, 2020. Awesome book by Taschen. Super awesome. And then the two final references that we're going to use to attribute is, of course, the movies. The original Blu-ray, which is highly controversial just because some people tend to like this. Some people don't love the new Criterion. In the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, if you don't have it, there is a wealth of documentaries that they actually tied into this, interviewing Larry Smith, Jane Harlan, Lisa Leone. There is a lot of stuff that they did with this release, which was actually a refresher for me that I didn't quite know about. So make sure to spend some time, look at these references. These are all found on the Filmmakers Academy platform, and I can make sure to share these on our Film Hang as well, just so you guys can tap into that. But let's dive into it. Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. This movie runs about 2 hours and 39 minutes, came out in 1999. This was the final film by Kubrick himself. And here's the trailer, which we're going to hop into.
Oh, share your image, share your screen, man.
Oh, let me share. Yeah.
That's my fault. I got you to unshare.
No, you're good. All right, here you go. We're back to sharing. So, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, and now we're going to watch the trailer.
They did a bad thing. They did a bad thing. They did a bad thing. Fear some multiculturalism, breaking turns, living fix. Yeah, traveling all your hormones to get your love back to you. What I'm saying. You ever pray with all your heart and soul just to walk away.
Oh,
That's a great trailer. And you know what I love
Yep.
about Kubrick is he was known to always cut his trailers, and they were always simple and effective. And a lot of people, I don't know if he actually cut that trailer. I'm curious. That's something that I actually didn't have the time to look into directly for this film. But when this
Okay.
trailer released, it captivated people to think that this was going to be this kind of like sexy film about elite socialites, orgy scenes. There was a lot that came out about this movie, especially around his death, but people didn't realize quite what they were going to be walking into when this film ultimately released. And we're going to talk about that reception, but we want to frame this movie as best as we can. And if there's one concept that shows up throughout the movie time and time again, it's where the rainbow ends. You're going to see this not only illustrated to the audience through signs, you're going to see it in dialogue, you're going to see it in metaphorical imagery. And as we talk about this movie tonight, it's all gearing towards what was Kubrick really trying to say with this movie. And considering how much he wasn't able to say when we start to talk about the subject matter and really his perspective of this film and potentially even maybe his own life experiences along the way. But where the rainbow ends, keep that in your mind. A lot to say here. So Kubrick, director, if you don't know him, I mean, you got to. He's done movies like The Shining, 2001: A Space Odyssey. He did Barry Lyndon, Doctor Strangelove. Before this, Full Metal Jacket, which might be my favorite movie of all time. Kubrick was a larger-than-life figure, but also a man of mystery. He was a director who averaged maybe a movie every 10 years if you could squeeze it out of him. He was known to have said he wished he could have been the likes of Woody Allen, which, ironically, maybe he would have not said that today, considering everything this film's about. But in terms of Woody Allen's output, he wished he could have been that person, but he was this man of obsession. He was a savant in his own right. He was a master of story. And I don't want to put Kubrick on a pedestal, and we're going to go through the crew because I think what was so awesome about Kubrick, he was not only just a craftsman, he was a producer. He's a man of logic, and he was a man of curiosity, and he brought the best out of people. And if you haven't seen the documentary that's in the most recent Criterion collection, there's, I forget the documentary. It's called Never Just a Dream by Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut. It's Jane Harlan and some of his crew, Larry Smith, and they talked about Kubrick didn't want the smartest person. He wanted the person that was the most curious and the individual that came up every day and just gave it their best. And I think that's what Kubrick was so emblematic of being, was someone who was obsessive and was always going to give it his best. And I think throughout his career, as early as Spartacus, which was his big studio movie that drove him kind of crazy, if you will. Then there was the films like Lolita. Every time he was searching for perfection and searching through obsession, and this film is very much just that. But Chris, what was your first Kubrick film, and how do you look at him as a director?
I was Shining. Shining was the first movie I saw. Oh, somebody just put The Killing on there. That's amazing. Yeah, I love the masks in that too, ironically. But yeah, The Shining was my thing, and I first learned about Kubrick as this guy who was like he insisted upon I've forgotten Wendy from The Shining doing like all those takes, whatever it was, like 172 takes or something crazy. So I was like, this guy's an absolute nutcase. He doesn't seem like he's for me. But then the more I got into his films, a bit like you, the older I got, the more I kind of wanted to see, you know, the ambiguity in his films and why he did certain things the way he did. And I kind of like that. That's why I like Kubrick more than any other director out there, because I like the whole nuance that you have to dive into, and the fact that like what we're doing right now is going to talk about things that people are going to disagree with and people are going to agree with, and people are going to say, oh, you know, that's not how I interpret it, and that's fine. You know what I mean? That's kind of like what I like about Kubrick, and it's the thing that I found when I watched The Shining. You know, like I always go to those room 237s and ask people what they think it meant and why they thought it meant that. Why was, you know, all the different imagery in that, all the different symbolism throughout that movie. You know what I mean? What was the maze, you know, and all these different things that we were talking, that you and I will talk about now. That was the thing that I found most enticing about Kubrick. And it started with The Shining, and then it went Clockwork Orange, and then after that, yeah, I started like you. I went to Full Metal Jacket, which I thought was such a cool movie. You know what I mean? And then this was like my fourth Kubrick, and yeah, I love him.
Yeah, Kubrick was a G, and he was always chasing this concept, which will go full circle in this movie, but this dissection of violence. He was a very interesting man, and he lived through some very interesting periods in life, and being a Jewish American off of the heels of the Holocaust, and who he inevitably married, and the relationship that his wife had in relationship to Germany. There was a lot of interesting things always pulling at Kubrick, and him just pulling from his life. But we're going to speak so much about Kubrick, and if you have not watched his filmography, I highly recommend it. And he's one filmmaker that I recommend almost more than anyone watch all of his films in order, starting with like his earliest Fear and Desire, and then I think there was a film even before
Paths
that.
of Glory as well. Get those out.
Yeah, Paths of Glory. Go through all of his films, The Killing, all of them in order, and you really do get to see the progression. There's also a really awesome series, if you can still find it. They might have pulled it because I think it might be on Patreon now, but it's called The Director Series. It's by filmmaker Cameron Bell, and he does an awesome job of breaking down Kubrick's filmography by release and also speaking to his life anecdotally. So that was really awesome. This film was also written by Kubrick himself. He was typically a writer, sometimes with others, sometimes by himself. He worked with Frederick on this project, who was also an acclaimed writer of that time. He worked with other filmmakers like John Schlesinger, and this was something that Kubrick was really excited about, and he felt he needed to bring on someone like Frederick to tell this story, which is really cool. And this also just shows how much of a collaborator Kubrick was. You know, Kubrick always kind of gets the credit, but there was a lot of people in his life that he collaborated with throughout the years to make these films possible. One of which was Jan.
Oh, sorry, man. I'm just looking through his IMDb here, and it's like he wasn't afraid to write erotic cinema, really. You know, women and men, stories of seduction, The King's Whore. You know, all these different films are all kind of like along that kind of erotic thriller style. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying.
He's definitely accomplished. And Zach, who's on this call, he actually wrote a book, it seems like, and this is something I actually found out recently about his experience, to my understanding, writing Eyes Wide Shut. It's called Eyes Wide Open. So definitely check that out. I know that probably has additional stuff that I am not even privy to. So those were the writers. Then there's the producers, Jan Harlan, Brian W. Cook. Harlan was actually a longtime collaborator. I think they started working together as early as A Clockwork Orange. Through every film since then. I believe he was either brother-in-law or stepbrother, something along those lines, but they were a very frequent collaborator, and you can find him speaking to the craftsmanship of Kubrick through a lot of documentaries. So he is someone, especially, well. Yeah, I believe this is on the set of The Shining. So,
oh, really?
Great look, great hair. I believe he's still alive as well, which is awesome. And, you know, I hope that he gets to have more opportunities of being able to speak to their collaboration and what that was like. Then we have the cast. Everyone knows that this movie was centered around Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who played Dr. William Harford and Alice Harford. They were a married couple at this time, and Kubrick needed to have a married couple to be on screen to play this role. He felt that that was necessary in a lot of the ways that he felt he needed to have a robot or artificial intelligence to do AI, which is why he ultimately passed the script on to Kubrick. He was very adamant to bring things to life in the way that he saw. And for a film like this that very much centered around the dynamic of a relationship, infidelity, desire, he wanted to be able to have two people who were living in a relationship themselves to be able to bring that to screen. And who better than Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who are the focal point of this film. And they're very interesting characters, right? They're socialites.
Yeah.
Dr. William Harford, he's likely a millionaire doctor living in Manhattan, slowly climbing the social ladder. And you see that as early in this film when they go to this party, and you end up learning what that party is. But Will is very much this kind of like socialite, but also this bohemian. He wants to be able to be close to people like Nick Nightingale, and he tries to straddle that line, and he thinks that as he climbs this ladder, there's going to be something waiting for him. But what he finds out in this film, what's waiting for him on the other side of that social climb, is maybe not what he was expecting to experience. And these characters are super fascinating, and I love the BTS. If you haven't had any chance to like go through the BTS of Eyes Wide Shut, there's a lot. And yeah, two super impactful characters. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Chris?
I was going to say, he's the doctor, isn't he? So he's the professional sort of like, you know, the life-saving guy. And I think she owns an art gallery, or owns a failing art gallery, or a failed art gallery, or something like that. She's the artist, and he's the sort of, you know, professorial kind of, profession, you know, being a doctor. So we have these vastly different people in that respect. And I think the way that they act on camera, the way that they behave, not act on camera, the way that they behave throughout this film is kind of like, you know, like she's the artist, she's honest, she's kind of, you know, too honest, I suppose, throughout. Whereas he's much more veiled and almost, you know, trying to keep his desires secretive. You know what I mean? And I think that's very interesting, the way that he's painted him in that way.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll dive more into those characters, but these are the leads of the movie. Of course, we have the daughter, who is Helen Hartford. We're going to talk a lot more about her and what she symbolizes to this movie and the reality of what's actually happening within this film. So much to say in this place. Todd Field, amazing director, not only an amazing actor. If you haven't watched his most recent film, Tar, absolute masterpiece of cinema, masterpiece of cinema with Kate Blanchett. Highly recommend watching it. He also did other movies like In the Bedroom and Little Children. He's a very accomplished director. He went on to doing really awesome stuff. But Nick Nightingale is this very interesting figure that almost acts as the gatekeeper into this world that William ultimately decides to descend into. And there's a lot of stuff with the Sonata Cafe and who he is in the hierarchy of this world. But Todd Field, highly recommend checking out his body of work if you haven't. Really awesome filmmaker, and super excited to talk more about his character. Then we have Sidney Pollack, which is, again, another amazing director. Kubrick was not shy for bringing on the best he could to fit these roles. And Sidney Pollack, who did films like Out of Africa, Tootsie. I mean, he was also an amazing actor that straddled both of those worlds so perfectly. Came in to play Victor Ziegler, who has so much depth and which is really kind of the face of the apparatus that's at play here. Chris, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about Sidney Pollack. I mean, he's a master.
That isn't that unbelievable? You know what I mean? It's a little bit. The only thing I can compare it to modern day is in The Fabelmans, which you and I weren't big fans of, but Spielberg getting David Lynch to play John Ford, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say, but like getting, and even that's like a 2-minute long scene. It's not like a very long one where he basically tells Spielberg that if he puts the horizon in the middle of the frame, then he's rubbish. But like Sidney Pollack, getting him to play this role, which, you know, you and I were arguing before, whether it's, you know, whether he's an antagonist or not, you know, it's such a nuanced role. And, you know, I'm sure you're going to talk to it, but like he didn't just have him for like a day's filming or a couple of days filming, which when you're on film set, you know, everything's all about diary these days. You know, you only get one day with certain actors or certain people, and you have to get every single one of their scenes done. Spielberg had this guy for weeks upon end. You know what I mean? Like he shot one scene with him, which is the scene in the billiard room, for 2 weeks solid, and it's like a 15-minute long scene. You know, it's unbelievable that you could get somebody of this guy's clout at the height of his clout, I suppose. Or maybe a bit after he's done all these major movies, but still, you know, it's like getting. I think they wanted Billy Wilder in Jerry Maguire to be the guy at the beginning of Jerry Maguire. It's akin to that. They didn't get him, but you know, it's akin to that. So yeah, I love Victor Ziegler and I love Sidney Pollack playing him, and I can't imagine anybody else playing that role, to be honest.
And I think there's a famous conversation that Kidman, Cruise, and Pollack all had about ultimately, I know Cruise and Kidman ultimately bought property in England because the production was running so long that they just relocated to shoot there. And the question came up for Pollack of like, of course I want to be on this movie. It's working with Stanley Kubrick. What does the commitment look like? Is this really going to be just a couple days shoot, or is this going to be a month long or months long pursuit? And of course, with Kubrick, everything takes time based on his obsession and really trying to feed into this dreamlike world and have these characters operate at that level. Nothing is ever quick. But Sidney Pollack, we're going to speak a lot about this character. And of course, we have Larry Smith, who is the cinematographer. Larry Smith has a really cool background, and I want to especially highlight him because Kubrick's a longtime collaborator in the camera department was John Alcott. He shot a series of Kubrick's films, and Larry Smith actually came up under Alcott, I believe, starting on Barry Lyndon through The Shining, then Full Metal Jacket, to inevitably then take cinematography role as Alcott went on to being a director. Kubrick phoned him up one day talking about this project, and I believe how it went is Larry Smith would always interface and work with Kubrick, especially in the lighting department, and just, you know, he had a really tight-knit crew, and we're going to speak to some of the other like key players that, whether it's Leon Vitelli, Lisa Leone, Larry Smith, his editors, he really phoned up a lot of the same people and wanted to build that army. And I think the way that it went for Larry, knowing that he was going to be on this film, is Kubrick called him one day and was like, hey, I want to talk to you about movies. And Larry's like, well, I'm going to the gym. And, you know, someone like Kubrick couldn't understand what that even meant. He didn't understand why people went on holiday. He was like, why would you go to the gym instead of coming over to my house to talk about movies? Like, I want to embark on another journey. It's like, Larry, come here instead of wasting your time there. And I believe he frequented the Pinewood lot a lot. And most of the productions at that time in the UK, a lot of the bigger ones operated out of that studio, still a very famous space in the UK for movies. And I can't remember who it was that came up to him and said, I heard you're working on Kubrick's next film, which that was news to Larry. And then little did he know, he was wrapped up in this production that took 400 days to shoot. But this was his big, not breakthrough, because he was already a part of the roster for Kubrick and he was a frequent collaborator, but he slowly got to make that uphill trajectory to be the cinematographer of this film. And he has a really awesome perspective that I think he learned from the time of Barry Lyndon and then from Full Metal Jacket to this film. And I'm really excited to talk about his cinematography because some of the stuff that they do on a technical level for this film, I wish I saw more in modern day cinematography, especially considering the technology that we have in digital cameras. So Larry Smith, look him up. Jocelyn Pook, composer, score, sound, music. We all know Kubrick loves all of those things. Everything is an element to his making of a movie. In this film in particular, there's so much weight on the composition. And Chris, I want you to speak to this because I know your background is in classical music. And Kubrick, like PTA, is such a master at needle drops. He's so good at using music to push the narrative forward, whether it's that opening song in Full Metal Jacket or to the sex scene of this film between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman after the initial party. He's a master, but Chris,
even
you know so much.
But even using Beethoven in Clockwork Orange, you know what I mean? Or using Strauss, Also sprach Zarathustra in 2001. It was like kind of the way that he used music was just like this it opened everybody's eyes. I mean, that is one of the coolest needle drops of all time. And in this, one of the craziest things, I was reading all about this and I was just blown away by the use of music in this. Like, there was a guy, let me find it on here and I've got it, right? But there was a guy who was called Gregory Ligeti, right? Who that piano theme comes from. So when it's just like this high pitched pinging on the piano, just clanging all the way through, right? That's literally a piece that this guy created, and if anything, it creates this sense of anxiety every time he's walking around New York. I'm on tenterhooks, you know what I mean? That's what one of those coolest things about music is. And then he does this like this ding 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 ding, like that's always sort of paralleled and everything. And when you look at this story and this idea of it being about over the rainbow and about things paralleling on either side, and there being this idea of mirrors, which is such a strong theme, using just that on the piano is unbelievable. Not to mention Nick Nightingale. What does he do? He's a pianist, and I like to think that that's one of the reasons why Kubrick was so into this piano theme. But Jocelyn Pook did another thing as well, which is really cool. In that circle of all the masquerade people, all the people in the masks. I was trying to figure out what to call them, like the sex party people, right? In the masks, sex party people sounds like a song, right? Those people in the masks. When we're in that orgy scene, right? She puts this kind of crazy sort of that kind of weird sort of chanting. That's actual Romanian oligarchic Christian liturgy that's being played backwards. So that's what you're listening to right now is backwards Christian music, which I think is one of the craziest things of all time, but they did it. And then, as I said, the music that lulls you into this is a waltz, Shostakovich, waltz number 2, the jazz waltz. And it's this really eerie sort of dance, and it takes us in, it takes us out. We start with that, we finish with that, this paralleling all the way through with the structure. And it is a dance. It's a husband and wife, you know, going through this dance, which they do at the swingers party early on. But the whole thing is this dance from beginning to end. People going through this kind of repressed emotion and also going through distrust and everything like this. It's immense in the way that music is used throughout this film. And I think I would say, like, as much as I love all of his other films and everything, I think music is used in this minimalistically better than any Kubrick film that I've ever seen. Like, I loved it in The Shining, that really eerie music as they're driving towards the Overlook Hotel. But this is just so much more involving, you know what I mean? If that's a good word to use. You know what I mean? It's terrifying. It really did freak me out throughout the film. And yeah, to the point where I want to turn it down when I've got that piano going on. I can't imagine what it's like watching it in the cinema, you know?
All right. So going back to this, the reason why we wanted to talk about this and more in depth is just that Kubrick had a lot of key players that helped make this film possible, one of which Lisa Leone, which we're going to talk about more with the making of this film. But there's so much about the production design in this film that I want to speak to, and I want to show the incredible people that worked alongside him to make that possible. So the synopsis, this film, if you have not watched it, it is about, in its simplest form, a Manhattan doctor embarks on a bizarre night-long odyssey after his wife's admission of unfulfilled longing. So as we break down this film, we'll talk about that a little bit more. This film is very simple. It's very close to the subject, the source material, which is Traum Novelle, Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler, I believe is how you want to say that. And to kind of give the more full synopsis of this movie, in the earliest 20th century Vienna during Mardi Gras, Dr. I don't even know how you say that, Fridolin, and his wife, Fridolin, in Albertina's marriage is destabilized when she confesses a sexual fantasy about a Danish officer from their recent vacation. That night, Fridolin embarks on a surreal odyssey through Vienna's underworld, culminating at a mysterious mask orgy among the city's elite, where he is exposed as an intruder and saved by a masked woman who sacrifices herself for him. Upon returning home, Albertina describes a disturbing dream where she's made love to the Danish officer while watching Fridolin being crucified, driving him to spend the following day obsessively retracing his steps and investigating the orgy, only to encounter dead ends and ominous warnings. When he finally returns home to find his mask deliberately placed on his pillow, Fridolin confesses everything to Albertina, who consoles him and suggests they focus on having survive their dangerous brush with forbidden desires rather than dwelling on what might have been, and the story ends with the couple greeting a new day with their daughter and their marriage tested but intact.
That was a mouthful, man.
Yeah. And Kubrick followed this movie beat for beat. There's not a lot of deviations, at least in the final film. Obviously, we're going to talk about the edit and all of that stuff, but Kubrick loved this film. And to our understanding, he read this sometime around in the 1960s or maybe sometime after. It's as early as The Shining is when he wanted to develop this movie, but this is very much the source material. I highly recommend
Yeah, I agree with you.
watching. Yeah.
I agree. Read this, the Trown of it. I mean, like there are translations of it online, and it's good. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I don't know. What do you think, Sweeney? Why do you think that he made it almost beat for beat the same, but in modern day? Or it was modern day.
I think that's what Kubrick was really good at. He was really good at taking source material. I mean, every single one of his movies came from a book, right? And I think his goal was ultimately to adapt these books and do what he was really good at, is seeing the world for what it is and using these other stories to be the vessel for the stories that he wanted to dissect and tell. And I think that's what he naturally saw with this. And we're going to get into some of the themes and ultimately what transpired with this movie and this story and how he used this story to be a vessel for something larger. But I know he loved this book, and based on what I read, is he felt like this book was one of the best examinations of human desire and ultimately one of the best examinations or vessels for the story that he was trying to tell. And I think it's super fascinating. And it's an interesting book. If you haven't read it, it's in a completely different time period, different location, which brings what Kubrick wanted to bring this story to the United States in New York City. And he has a very interesting fascination about the United States. All right, so speaking to the themes here and going into the location, so we know in the source material, 20th century Vienna, taking this to New York City, Kubrick had something to say about the American films, the dark star, the power it be, and that's something we're going to talk a lot more about with setting, but Kubrick was always fascinated about America as this empirical power and their lust for violence and bringing it back to stateside. And at this point, Kubrick didn't live a life in New York, the city that he grew up in, being born in Brooklyn for many years. I believe that he moved to the UK during the time of making 2001: A Space Odyssey and didn't look back. None of this film, outside of some exteriors, any part that Kubrick was involved in person, was not shot in New York City. He recreated this film on set at Pinewood Studios, rebuilding parts of New York City, not identically, and we'll get into that a little bit, but New York plays a central theme. This is where the film takes place. Kubrick believed this to be his best film yet. Before he died, he was quoted saying that he loved this movie. It was everything that he wanted it to be. And he was very excited to bring it out to the real world. Kubrick had something to say with this film. And what's interesting is ultimately what became the reception of this film at launch. Obviously, the anticipation of someone like Kubrick, who just recently passed away, this film, its stars, what it was speaking to, the sex appeal, what people thought based on the trailer that I showed you guys earlier on. But what was interesting is this film came out in 1999 on July 16th, a day before my birthday. My birthday is actually on July 17th, and it was met with mixed reception, especially in North America and Europe. People did not know what to take from this film, especially if you watch it without the context in which we're going to impose here shortly. This film was not what people expected from the trailer. It was not this steamy sex film that everyone thought about. What's funny, if you watch the movie, it's a sex movie, but it's never really like attractive. It's never, Tom Cruise getting what he was going after. It's actually Tom Cruise failing at sex multiple times throughout this movie. But it did find a lot of audience in places like Japan and the Mediterranean countries, which I think is super fascinating. So this film, which had mixed reception, and at this point Kubrick's not even alive, but something that I know to be true about a lot of Kubrick's films, especially with movies like A Clockwork Orange, which was pulled out of theaters, is his films were different. They spoke to themes that people were typically not comfortable of discussing, and this film was no different. And his movies were always met with a mixed bag of reception. I mean, look at Barry Lyndon. That movie, considering what it is, was not met with the box office success that Kubrick typically wanted, which was why, from what I've heard, that he went into doing The Shining, something that was more of a genre piece. Not that that film didn't have themes that we're not going to find here today, but Kubrick was a master of knowing how to stack his movies, release them to the world, and even though that they were decisive, not always loved at first, there's a really famous quote from a documentary, if you actually watch The Shining. It's in the supplementaries. And Spielberg always talked about Kubrick's films getting better and better every time you watch them. In specific for The Shining, Spielberg talked about the first time he watched that movie, he didn't find it very scary. But by the fifth time, he was completely horrified. And if there's one thing I have to say about Kubrick's films is you want to watch them as many times as you can. And even by the 30th time, that's where the granularity, the obsession, his high takes, seeing what he was trying to go for really comes to surface. And did you love this movie the first time you watched it, Chris? Was it something, I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't know what to think of it.
No, me too. I wasn't a fan the first time I saw it, but then you're right. It's one of these things. I mean, in the week that we read that film students can't, like there's film professors who were saying at major film schools saying film students can't watch 3-hour long movies. They can't make it through them. And it's like, in the week that we find that out, I think that this was one of those movies where at first I didn't get through it, but now I am so intently watching Kubrick movies for symbolism, for things like that, because I know that things don't accidentally appear in those movies, that they're there and they've been placed and they've been meticulously included in the shots. And it's things like that. It's things like this today, us doing these talks, and there's podcasts out there left, right and center that do talks about cool things that you might not have noticed in movies. So we're not reinventing the wheel here, but it's really cool when you listen to them and you hear about those things that you can come back and watch this movie and go, oh my God, I didn't even notice that. Like there's one thing I've seen literally in the last watching, and I think now I'm on like viewing number 8 or 9, right? But it's like, I've just watched it the other night and I've gone, oh, I didn't even see that in the background there. And it's something that I thought it really speaks to themes that we're going to see. But I was like, yeah. That's one of the things that's brilliant about Kubrick movies, and I urge you, like Brendan just does, go back, watch a few, watch The Shining, watch the different elements that are in there. It's fascinating. It really is. And especially now, mate, because like we've got the Swifties, and like my nieces are Swifties, and they love looking for sort of nuance in all of her tracks and all of her social media posts and stuff like that. There's people out there who are desperate to look for, you know, elements within art. And I think that, not that I'm comparing Kubrick to Taylor Swift, but at the same time, it's like people are desperate to look for those things and those little nuggets, those little, you know, Easter eggs. Yeah, go and look for them because they're there in Kubrick and it's amazing.
And Cameron, who just dropped a comment in here, Japanese culture has very interesting sexual component. It actually makes sense that it would have done very well there. And that's super true. I think that Kubrick's films that are very sexually charged by nature, especially look at something like Lolita. I believe in Japan, they have things like Lolita Con, you know? So even the Mediterranean, which I feel like carries that level of sex appeal. And when you think of the countries that are along the Mediterranean coast, it makes sense why these films might not have clicked so well in places like North America and Europe, but found some type of audience in these other countries. And like I said, this was a film that Kubrick wanted to make for a really long time. We know that he was at least reading and starting to develop this script as early as the production of The Shining. It's believed that it could even be in as early as the 1960s that Kubrick wanted to make this, but him and Christian, they had a long conversation about making this film, to my understanding, based on the documentary that came with Eyes Wide Shut. And when he was making The Shining, and I believe even before that, he as a filmmaker didn't know if he was ready to be able to speak to a movie of this caliber, especially once we dive into the themes and his own life and his relationship. And I think Kubrick is very much dissecting what it means to be honest in a relationship, despite the themes and kind of the horrors that are lurking in the shadows of this film. I think Kubrick tried as much to face who he was as an honest man, or as honest as he could be as a man. You know, I think there's an interesting, almost autobiographical component to Eyes Wide Shut, and potentially an admission of guilt that he carried. And I think that's what's most fascinating about this film, is he took a lot of time to really put together his own perspective, and ultimately what I think made Eyes Wide Shut so tangible of a film. And, you know, so much of his movies deal with the topic that we're going to be breaking down. And I know I keep beating around the bush and I'm not saying exactly what it is, because I want to build this perspective moment. But this was a film that he cared. Yeah, this was a film that he cared a lot about. You could see that, especially in his final chapter of life. And Kubrick seek it, right? This is what we keep talking about. It's like he's telling a story about something he experienced himself. And Kubrick, at the time of making this, and more importantly, the years leading up to this, Kubrick was a rock star. He was a artist that defined 20th century cinema, but not cinema just itself, the art world. And Kubrick would have very much been someone that would have been brought into these elite society gatherings and things that were shown in this film. I don't think Kubrick was too far removed, and this is obviously all speculation, but I think there is a world in which Kubrick might have seen something that us commoners might not be able to see in a life unless you live it like Kubrick, or were grown into these elite classes. And I think Kubrick was trying to say something that was potentially even an admission of guilt. Not that I think Kubrick partook in ultimately what was happening here. I think we know for a fact that he was very much a family man. He always brought his family around. He was very, very secretive of his life. He lived on his estate for a lot of the time. A lot of his productions were developed out of his home. A lot of accounts for his crew members would hang at his house for multiple hours building out these movies or Pinewood. Kubrick was known to be someone that didn't take a lot of vacation or a lot of personal time. He was always focusing on his film, but we do know that he was at the time where, being a filmmaker and a director like him, he was a rock star. And to kind of have this perspective of Kubrick, when you look at Dr. William Harford, the Tom Cruise socialite doctor, climbing the ladder and being with this elite class, the Omni ones, which we're going to call them, and we're going to speak to that a little bit more. I think that Kubrick is very much that type of individual. You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's super fascinating about Kubrick, is you can find a lot of himself in all of his films.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you just jump it in there, Brendan, like, there's one, like, there's pictures out there now, I think it's from like 1972, and it's the de Rothschild party, like a masquerade ball that they held, that lots of people sort of like do side-by-side comparisons with this film. I think it's Rothschild, right? Or Rothschild. They own pretty much all the papers and everything on Earth. They're very, 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 very uber wealthy. Sort of like the Succession version of, you know, the whatever that family is on Succession. And I think that when you look at that, you see people like Salvador Dali get invited, artists, Andy Warhol get invited. And when you think about it, Kubrick at the time was pretty much one of those. Like, absolutely, you know, people were obsessed with them as artists, and the rich weren't not akin to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't see something like this. I'm buying into your theory there.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of accounts based through the like lens of this film that Dr. William Hartford is very much Kubrick, or Kubrick in some capacity, you know? So definitely keep that in mind.
Wasn't his father a doctor? Wasn't Kubrick's
His
dad?
father was a doctor. Yeah, his father was a doctor. Yeah, growing up in Brooklyn, his father was a doctor. His family was heavily in medical. He was kind of the first to branch out more into the artistic endeavors. I believe his uncle was part of the people who helped finance his first film. So Yeah, I think he definitely had that perspective of a doctor just growing up in that family. And, you know, now that we think about Will Hartford as this almost kind of like Kubrick surrogate, if you will, someone that's a little bit different occupation, of course, but same perspective. Now it's the topic of taboo. It's obviously, when you look at this film, there's really only one way of looking at this story. And I think a big reason why it was so ahead of its time and so misunderstood is that Kubrick couldn't just show what this film was like explicitly trying to speak to, and that is, you know, the elite powers in this kind of tithe that happens potentially at that level, and what Kubrick might have seen being this figure that was navigating this social class. And this speaks to what we're not really able to say too much on YouTube, but just the concept of like, right? He obviously could not show that on screen. He could not simulate the sex of or children, I should say, but people that were underage. But through this film, Kubrick wanted to share this concept of what separates the elite class from the commoner class, the people that even might have money like the Will Hartfords and are climbing that social ladder. They're bound by morals. And Kubrick was really interested in speaking to these omni individuals, these omni people, these people that thought beyond the construct of like human society as we know it, this hyper normalization. And this film is all about being in this almost intermediary state between the dream world and the real world, and the world that we live being in the dream world. And while it was a very taboo topic, Kubrick masterfully tried to tell through the lens of this orgy and this almost sex cult something that runs a little deeper. And in being in 2026, and honestly with the news throughout the last decade and up to now, we know a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and what Kubrick might have known before a lot of us did in mainstream media today. And when you look at this film through the lens of that, and when you watch it back now and you understand this guilt that Hartford's character especially carried in the third act, we're going to go in this scene by scene breakdown, it makes a lot more sense what Kubrick was trying to speak to. And it wasn't just a bunch of 20-year-old models that were in this sex cult that potentially side off on doing it. I think what we know more now in history and what's ultimately come to the surface, and even the most recent Jeffrey Epstein doc, and not to even get overly conspiratorial, I think when you watch this movie back and go beat by beat, Kubrick was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And what's interesting is when I watched this back, 17 years ago now, 16 years ago now, it's really easy to get the like core themes of infidelity, desire, marriage, maybe the modern deconstruction of marriage, but there always felt like something was wrong with the film. And I know you could easily cite you know, the things of just how culture is moving forward. But now that we know all this stuff with Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Chris?
Hey, I mean, I don't want to get visited at my house for talking about this. No, but I mean, you're absolutely right. We've just seen it this week. There's been a massive tranche of emails that kind of show us behind the scenes a little bit of what's going on with these parties and people having islands and stuff. And, you know, it's nuts. I mean, there's pictures that appeared from that island as well, which have all these kind of crazy sort of religious temples on you know, not religious, sorry, anti-religious, I suppose, temples, you know, on the island. You know what I mean? So it's a very strange thing that I think all of us have kind of been not privy to, and all of us at our wage and our wealth wouldn't ever be privy to. You know what I mean? And it speaks, and this movie speaks to that. It speaks to this thing of these are the people that are above absolutely everybody in society, and they're doing things that are, you know, as animalistic and debased as you can get. You know what I mean? It just shows the higher you go. My dad always used to say, the higher a monkey climbs, the more you can see its ass. And I suppose that's kind of where we're at now. You know what I mean? The higher they are, the lower they go in terms of the, you know, to get their kicks. And yeah, it's absolutely mind blowing. As I said, the emails are just nuts. You know, you get, I mean, Elon Musk, the world's richest guy, there's emails in there from him that are utterly crazy, you know, and you just think to yourself, yeah, I mean, the lid's being blown off, and it's something that Kubrick was kind of trying to tell people about, potentially trying to tell people about, you know, 20 odd years ago. It's bonkers.
And what's interesting about Kubrick and what we know now, especially, is I think one, you guys have to watch that Judge Movies podcast. Type in Judge Movies podcast, Eyes Wide Shut, episode 4. You can find it on Patreon. It's free now. He does the best job of breaking down this film beat by beat in a manner that we're not even going to try to approach doing. Now that you guys kind of have the perspective shift, if you've not seen this movie, what to look at it for. If you have seen this movie and you're going to revisit how you should look at it, is the women in this orgy scene, and we're going to break this down, instead of having them being adult women, swap that out for something else. As we look at this film, there is a major perspective shift. And what's really interesting is it really grapples with the concept of when you're at this elite power and you can have everything, there's one thing that you can. And you see that with a lot of this topic around this subject matter. So now that we have this perspective, and Chris, if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah. I was going to say it kind of like it makes sense with the story if that is the case, because otherwise it's just people who are just banging sort of 20-odd-year-olds, and it's like there's no real, you should never tell of anybody of this. Well, it's kind of like a so what otherwise, you know what I mean? So clearly to look at it like Kubrick was hinting at something a lot more depraved kind of makes more sense for the story. That's why Bill is so shocked at what he's seen. That's why he breaks down at the end. That's why he's, worried that they're going to chase after him and come and hunt him down. That's why Nick Nightingale goes missing. All of this is kind of makes sense if that's what Kubrick was hinting at. Otherwise, it's just, people having lots of sex.
So that takes us to what Kubrick also has with this film. If you've watched his filmography, he has the American films, being that of The Shining, that of Full Metal Jacket, that tells a world built on violence. I think Kubrick had this really interesting fascination about what man is capable of. You see that in the way he chronicled, the ape in 2001 being able to yield the bone to kill, to then that bringing them to space. And then you have, even though A Clockwork Orange isn't about, the Americas films, you see the abilities of man in that capacity and humans going rogue in the way that the institution, being the jail, preys on the individual and to reform. And then we have The Shining, which has so many themes dealing with colonialism and the Indian burial ground, and similar themes with pedophilia between Jack and Danny. And there's so much. And again, if you haven't watched the Judge Movies podcast, he has a whole episode about The Shining that equally correlates along the same levels of Eyes Wide Shut in this elite theme. And he's always speaking to this almost dark star and the Omni ones, and this power structure and this abuse of power and this almost hyper normalization. This world that we live in is not the same world that they live in. And that's something that's super fascinating. And I highly recommend looking always at his films through this lens of violence. He was very fascinated about what are humans capable of. And this film is no different, right? They have an objective that ultimately leads to the undoing of an individual in this film, potentially. And I think Kubrick always carried those themes through his film so well. And then, of course, he showed this film to Warner Brothers, right? Here's the famous story that he showed a cut. We don't know if it's the final cut. I don't believe that it was. And then he passed 6 days later. There are potential stories of hearing Kubrick yelling during the presentation of this film saying, "You cannot re-edit my film." I don't know if those are true, but we know that he died 6 days later, and we ultimately did get an edit that came out. Was it the edit that we all have, even on our Criterion today? We all know about the CGI and covering up some of this to be able to get a theatrical release in the United States. I don't believe they actually added those CGI cover-ups in some of the other European countries, but he unfortunately passed before the film actually was able to release, which is where some of the conspiracy comes in. What happened with Kubrick? He was supposedly died from a heart attack. But we don't know whether the film we have today is the final one. And we did lose a real one. We lost him on March 7th, 1999, and this man operated on another level. And before we go even further into conspiracy, he likely wouldn't have been around today if he would not have died then. But this guy was a maverick in his own right, and to be able to have his films and have this be his final testament of his brilliance and the story and the themes that he was trying to speak to. Hopefully this presentation tonight continues to carry on his legacy and how he was so insightful, so curious, and eyes wide shut. He's a G. I mean, what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think, and going back to what you were just saying there about is it the really is it really his cut? I mean, like, I'm not certain how factual this one is, but I read online, and certain somebody who's in the chat, if they're still here with us, can drop us a message about this and can check it out for us. But there was something I read that was like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were shown a cut by Kubrick himself, and then there was a point where when they were asked after the event, after the premiere and everything like that, and they saw a cut of it, they said that's not the cut that Stanley showed us. Like, I've definitely seen something that was about that, and like maybe that's something that interests me. Maybe it isn't his cut. Maybe there was things taken out of it that, you know, we'll never see. I mean, I don't know. Did he delete all of the cuts? Wasn't that something that Kubrick used to do? He got rid of all of the cuts in the final one so that there wasn't a second cut ever out there? Or am I making that up?
Well, I mean, that's why some
Kubrick got rid of his cuts.
Yeah, I know that's why some people speculate he shot such limiting coverage, so there wasn't the ability in the way like Alfred Hitchcock did the same thing. He was very precise with his coverage. That way people could not go back and re-edit his movies. And I think Kubrick had obviously a lot of leeway. He was always in his contract to deliver the final cut. But I do think being someone that's so obsessive and so in control, he would have been taking great lengths to always ensure that his films did not get manipulated. And I do think what we have is probably close to what Kubrick's cut is. They have gone on record being Leon Vitelli, Lisa Leone, and some of the other family members in the Kubrick estate after his passing. They went to great lengths to make sure that nothing was changed. We, of course, do know about the censorship and the applying of these CGI bodies to be able to cover up some of the nudity and the sex scenes that did happen in that orgy sequence. We don't know if there was anything else cut out. There is a speculation. I know recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, they talked about that just with Quentin Tarantino and his producer.
Roger Avery. Yeah. He's co-writer.
Yeah. And being this hole in the original script, there was this narration that was supposed to play throughout the film. But to my understanding, since this wasn't the final cut that was shown, Kubrick was going to be doing that next, is bringing in this narration. So that's not present in the film. And I believe Kubrick's estate intentionally decided if he was not a part of it, they were not going to add it, even though they had a basic understanding of what he was going for. The only thing that I know that they went out of their way to shoot was some New York exteriors, which Lisa shot and directed herself because they had already planned that. And I believe they were steps away from doing that. So they knew exactly what Kubrick wanted out of that. But based on, again, we don't know what Warner Brothers did. And I know that there's something called Eyes Wide Cut that I did find, where it is an initiative that people are trying to bring what would have been the original cut and closer to the source material that Kubrick was following. I didn't have enough time to actually do a deep dive on this resource, but I highly recommend everyone checking it out.
That's
being
cool.
eyeswidecut.com. And there's a lot of people that speculate that there is a lot of manipulation. I haven't done enough research in this capacity, but I know that there was some stuff that was brought in by Warner Brothers just to be able to have it a proper theatrical release in North America.
There's a question as well from me, which is how much better could it make the film? Because I actually really like the ambiguity that's throughout it. It's led me down some really cool cul-de-sacs that in a very Kubrick, I hate using this word, but Kubrickian way. You know what I mean? And if we add a lot more stuff in, that'll answer obviously a lot of questions that have been generated, would that make it a better film for us or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my question.
What's interesting, Chris, is Zach Parker here. He said Kubrick did burn a lot of his negs on films when they were finished. And he was always editing the movie, even leading up to the release of it. And he believed that the only person that would have truly known was Leon Vitelli, who is now passed away.
Oh, that's a great comment.
And I believe he was on record saying that he did oversee the rest of Eyes Wide Shut leading up to theatrical release, something that I know Larry Smith was really upset about, which was why they did this 4K remaster and recolor, is after the passing of Kubrick, he wasn't able to sit in with the final color grade, and he doesn't believe, to my understanding, that the look that was released at the time of theatrical and then on the DVD and Blu-ray, the original Blu-ray, that is not accurate to what Kubrick and him were going for, which is why this new 4K re-release is far closer to what the original intention for the film was. So there was definitely some stuff, being that Kubrick had died, you know, I doubt that it's exactly what Kubrick wanted it to be. Right. You know, but I think it's still very close. And knowing the contracts that Kubrick had in place with people like Warner Brothers to have final say of the edit, I think that it's as close as we're going to hopefully get. And maybe Eyes Wide Cut's going to be able to fill in the gap for us there.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'd definitely watch it.
Yeah. So did the film kill him or something else? And this is where the conspiracy around Kubrick himself and this untimely death, right? He was 70 years old. He was of good health, and leading up to this, he was known to be in a very good spirit about the movie, especially presenting it to Warner Brothers. I know there's that one anecdote that maybe he was upset that Warner Brothers was going to recut the movie, but of all the other conversations and interviews that I saw, he was very positive even on that day, speaking to a lot of his crew members and potentially even Nicole Kidman leading up to the day that he even died. And then he died in the middle of the night due to a heart attack. He was by himself. It was a private passing, but unfortunately, he died before the film came out. But this brought a lot of conspiracy around, was it either the film that killed him? By a lot of accounts, this film was extremely exhausting, especially for a man that was in his 70s during the production, late 60s. They spent 400 days of principal. Even the crew said how exhausting this film was, but particularly how much Kubrick himself put into the making of this movie. He spent a lot of time, and just like every film, years agonizing over these films, being obsessed. And part of me, before we even get into the conspiratorial component of this film, part of me could see a man like him finally putting himself in the grave due to his obsession. I don't think that that is a stretch for reality. Now, the more sensationalized component of me would think that maybe someone did come after Kubrick due to the subject matter of this film. There's nothing that substantiates either, but it's really interesting considering the subject matter of this movie, what we know today, potential people that have gone missing due to this. Obviously, we know the Jeffrey Epstein case, and I think everyone's privy to those details at this point. But what do you guys think? Do you feel like Kubrick died naturally just from causes? You know, he was known to have a decently healthy bill of health. Was it the film that ultimately put him in the grave due to the stress and being able to bring this movie to market? Or was there someone potentially coming after him? What do you think, Chris?
You know what? It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's whether, you know, would they just kill the whole film? You know what I mean? If they, rather than just killing him, would they also not, you know, go to Warner Brothers and try and silence them and try and get them to pull the film? You know, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, I don't know. It is the long and short of it. But I remember you telling me a story about he was on the phone to Nicole Kidman days before his death or something, and he said a line which you probably know better than I do, but that was one of the conspiracy theory lines, and I was like, oh, that kind of sends it into a totally different space for me. But what was it you told me? What was the line that he said to Nicole Kidman apparently on the phone? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. So there's this, and I would love to do more research into this, but this feeds more into him getting killed, that he supposedly phoned up Nicole Kidman the day that he passed, saying the movie's really great. They had a conversation before they ultimately got off the phone, and him expressing that there's a lot of people watching us because of this movie. And I don't know if it was a sense of urgency or that he was feeling paranoid, but the general context of that call was the movie's moving forward. Things are good. It was presented to Warner Brothers, but there's a lot of people talking about this film. And I think it was due in part to the subject matter. And who knows if that ultimately meant something more sinister was at play. I think it's really easy for our minds to naturally gravitate towards that. But the subject matter is very heavy, and considering the world events of today, it's hard not to think that there's potentially something more sinister. And that's where the conspiracy of this movie is very fun. You know, like there's a lot of mystery around this movie. And I don't want to, you know, have Kubrick's passing be completely encapsulated by conspiracy. But a big part of this film and what has made it so mysterious and stand the test of time these last 27 years is very much, unfortunately, the untimely passing of Kubrick.
Yeah. And I think as well, one thing is, you know, you've said it, he became obsessive with his subjects and his subject matter. Obsessive, you know what I mean? And is it not more likely, just I'm throwing it out there and being devil's advocate, that he was obsessed with the subject matter, which is about, you know, unveiling the truth and then being followed and people disappearing and people dying and stuff like that? Is it not more likely that he became absolutely obsessed with the subject matter to the point where he drove himself paranoid? I think that's a much logical conclusion to draw, personally.
And considering if this is potentially autobiographical, again, these are just kind of concepts and assumption here. Who knows how much he was potentially leaving with anything he might have witnessed throughout his life and career. There's a lot at play here. Like Cameron said, you know, he is in his 70s. 70s is a long run. It's not atypical to pass away in your early 70s, even if you do just get a mild sickness. You know, that is something that does happen. So we don't want to fully lean into the conspiracy, but again, it's hard not to, considering just what we know today. Let's just put it that way.
Tony McBride, screenwriting, by the way, making a comment. Hello, you guys. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and guys, thanks so much for being a part of this call. I know that it's not perfect. I know the audio is not perfect. We're definitely going to clean it up, and we're going to try to figure out what went wrong this call. But we really appreciate everyone showing up for these, and we've had an audience that's been sticking with us the whole time. And now we're going to get into more the meat of this whole Eyes Wide Shut, the themes. And Chris, it's been an awesome conversation so far. So
yeah,
Eyes Wide Shut. Oh, 100%. Eyes Wide Shut. And I think what Kubrick was going for was speaking to this hyper-normalized world that we live in and what's at the surface and what's beneath. And Eyes Wide Shut, if you look at it, it's like two parts, right? You see the dream world, and it's going to be confusing because we're going to invert these terms a little bit for the sake of the story and what it really means. But we see this dream world and this real world and how they slowly start to coalesce and do this dance and melody together. And they, as Will kind of goes on this Midnight Odyssey, but at its surface, the core themes, marriage, Midnight Odyssey, infidelity, choosing to look away being one of the more broader themes. We see, you know, this marriage that's been together, they're strong as they navigate the elite class, especially in this first scene as we start to talk about that. But that's at its surface. That's what most people took away from the movie, especially during its initial watch. But then we go into below the surface, the perspective that Chris and I have been talking about for these last 45 minutes, the social order, a tradition that binds. And there is only one way to look at this movie. And Stanley Kubrick, especially when you look at that third act and you come to realize what he's talking about, he almost makes you question everything that's been on screen in the way that Will slowly starts to question the reality that he's been inhabiting, the characters that he's come across, and even his own ability to course correct after the events that happen at that orgy sequence, right? And that's what's interesting as we dive deeper. There's almost this like two tones of this film, what's on screen. And this is not new to Kubrick. He's done this with Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, all of his movies. What he's showing is not necessarily the story that he's trying to tell. And you see that very much with The Shining, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think this is a really important line, which is towards the end of the movie, which goes kind of full circle with the concept of us living with our eyes wide shut. And I think Kubrick was pointing this directly at the audience, that we live in this world where we choose to not look at things, or we're so busy. And I know I feel that in 2026, that it's really easy to get caught up in our world, and even something like the Jeffrey Epstein case and those files, to kind of live in this hyper normalized, it's bigger than us, it's too much for us to grapple, the politics, there's so much at stake. I'm going to remanufacture this world around me to make it far more comfortable. And I think that's what Kubrick does so well, is he speaks to that comfort in all of us when horror, when we're faced with it, we tend to look away, or in this case, live with eyes wide shut. And Alice at the end of this film, as they're in this department store, as Dr. Will Hartford is divulge this journey that he's been on and what he's seen. Alice says it best. The important thing is that we are awake now and hopefully for a long time to come. And Kubrick knew what he was saying. He was a cheeky guy. Everything had impact and detail. And Kubrick wanted to express this whole concept of, even for them who was living in a world where they were awoken, it's really easy to drift back into this state of living in eyes wide shut. But yeah, Chris, what was your takeaway just with the core themes of this whole, I don't know, what's at the surface and what's underneath the surface?
I think one of the things that I was most drawn to in this film was the rainbow, right? And the rainbow costumes, everything like that. And underneath the sign of the rainbow is another sign that says under the rainbow, and it's exactly what you just said there in terms of above the surface and below the surface. You know what I mean? This idea of what's over the rainbow, and then eventually you find out what's under the rainbow. And if you watch this movie and the way that it's structured and the way that it goes from one side to the other, the build up to the climax when he's at the orgy, and then the downfall afterwards for the shame and the guilt that he feels and everything like this, it's literally this brilliant rainbow structure. And I think that always stuck with me. And this bit now, we started off, this bit that you've got just behind this quote here, we started off with Nicole Kidman Starkers, getting undressed or getting dressed, right? At the end, we've got her fully clothed up in a coat, out in the winter time and all this kind of stuff. It's like we've gone from this, this moment of openness and realization to this moment of closeness. While she's saying we'll be awake and everything, it's juxtaposed by the fact that they're not, they're incredibly bundled up. We've gone from the nudity to the clothed. And that's what I acknowledge the most from this bit. And this quote now about them being awake. We know they're not awake. We know that they're choosing to actively keep their eyes closed. That's how I see it. You know what I mean?
And through that, I think that's where we can start to dissect the dream world versus the real world that Kubrick does a really good job of delineating, especially as Tom Cruise's character slowly starts to navigate this Midnight Odyssey, and where you see both the dream world and real world collide. And Kubrick positioned the world that we all inhabit, and this is where you have to kind of flip the way we talk about this. The world that we inhabit is the fabricated dream world. That is the world that you see on the left. And the way that Kubrick personifies a lot of this or illustrates to it is with this heavy blue light, right? And we see this here with Alice in the really awesome fight scene when they're both smoking weed. There's this blue aura that comes in, but as the movie progresses and there's a couple of times we enter in the real world, which we'll illustrate, it's like when he goes to the orgy scene or what is it called? The Somerton home. That is the real world where the elite class is, where they take off their mask and put on their real face. And what's cool is Kubrick uses so many metaphors and ways to illustrate this. And the blue light, which was really interesting in the documentary, Larry talked about just trying to double up lights and try new theatrical things for this. And he was playing with some CTB, and he doubled it up real quick, and Kubrick came through and was like, I really like that. Let's try that for the exteriors. And Larry didn't think that he was going to like that look at all. It's very theater gels, right? Very strong. But Kubrick, you could see he really wanted to lean into this dream concept, and he even did that with the takes and the way he handled the production. He wanted to show these characters navigating this world that, if you look really closely and maybe enter into that real world, it starts to blur a little bit. And that's what we see here. It's the world we see versus the world that they see, especially as you climb this social hierarchy. And here you see it again, this blue light, very prominent. If you haven't watched this movie, it plays throughout the whole film in a multitude of ways, but he wants to show this fabricated world. And a fun tip, which we're going to talk about as well, is Kubrick was known for doing high takes. And in these scenes, especially the scenes where Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise confront each other and have this fight, the scenes where this is later in the film towards the third act when Tom Cruise comes home, he was always doing these high takes. And in one of the documentaries, he talks about wanting to whittle the characters down to almost put them into this almost hallucinatory state. If they're spending so many hours doing the same sequence over and over again, Tom Cruise entering in the room, there's something about their performances when you look back at the movie. One, they're incredible, but they're also extremely dramatic. dramatic almost in a way. Not to say that it felt like daytime television. That's not what it did, but it was a little bit more than what we might find in traditional cinema or cinema that we watch today. It was a heightened feeling, and I think that's what Kubrick really wanted to try to carry through. And we even see that when we talk about some of these day exteriors and night exteriors in New York. It doesn't feel like the New York that we all go to or the Manhattan that we go to. And he wanted to really put these characters in this dream state, their real world, but the dream world, the fake world that the elite also inhabited.
Didn't he say something like as well, Brendan? Like he was like, the first 20 takes are for the actors to learn their lines. I'm sure I heard this somewhere. It might have been
it's on the podcast.
Yeah, that's the one. And that was his sort of way to sort of lull them into this, like you said, hallucinogenic state almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he would do these high takes, and like you said, he would have the first 20 takes be for the actor, then they would slowly start to wear away at them, and they would become the character that they needed to be and the character that they wanted to be, or the character that he wanted them to be. And there is something about repetition, you know. I will say this, something that I learned from being a director, not that I think every scenario needs to have a high takes moment, but if you're a character like Will, when you walk through that door, you probably walk through that door in a very similar pattern every day, or a similar manner every day. That's not something that you're going to find the first day. It takes years to know, you know, Chris, the seat that you're in, you've sat in that chair how many times in your life?
Too long.
Hundreds, thousands of sessions in there. You have that the same way you hold yourself in that chair. And I think Kubrick was always looking for authenticity, and he found that through high takes. But there's a really funny aside where we talk about there's two types of actors, those like the Tom Cruises that you could mold into finding that perfect take. But then he talks specifically about working with actors like Peter Sellers, who was an amazing actor, but he was such a an eccentric individual. He said he would still do 100 takes with them, but there would only ever be one take, and you wouldn't know if that would be take 1 or take 99. Sometimes it came early, sometimes it came late, but it would only ever be one take, at least in Kubrick's mind, that would be worth making into the film. And then you would have other actors like Sidney Pollack. I think he spoke highly about him being such a great actor, being not only a director but an actor originally, who would be able to provide a workshop experience. And I think that's why that sequence took so long, is that Kubrick was known to always be workshopping on set and rewriting scripts. And there would be like Jack Nicholson, who hated that process during The Shining. It was notorious that him and Kubrick were butting heads because each day Kubrick would come to him with a new script, sometimes at lunch with a new script, and became such a tradition for Kubrick to constantly be writing and going back and forth between his trailer on set, that Kubrick would hand him a script and Jack Nicholson would literally just throw it in the trash because he said, why read it when you're literally about to give me another one after we do this? And I think that was the level of obsession Kubrick was always looking for, and why that high take scenario came into play. And with that dream world, I think for this, he wanted to break these characters down where they were almost in that dreamlike quality, which takes us to the real world, which we're going to see obviously in this masquerade scene, this party sequence. It's also in the intro party being the swingers party. He wanted to show the real world where the elite are, where they operate, and where they also move around in this dream world. And you're going to see that as we go into the scene by scene breakdown. This was something that Kubrick really wanted to pin against each other, to speak more largely to that a lot of times the world that we live in is a lot different than the world that maybe another class might inhabit. Masks being a very, very awesome illustration of the monsters or the real faces that people put on. And if you look at this, and I know that the box is small, but I'll hold it up. Criterion Collection did a really awesome job of having the face of Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise come in a mask form. And Kubrick was speaking to the mask not being the faces that you see. That is the mask right there, is the face. And then these are the true faces of the monsters that operate in the shadows or going after these taboo subject matters. Or, you know, this is who Kubrick wanted to really illustrate to. And these masks are not meant to be literal that they're putting on a mask. No, this is actually their face. This is the face of the elite class that he was speaking to.
I always laugh at these ones, by the way, because you wouldn't choose that mask that's got the big hole in the mouth, would you? You wouldn't choose to wear that all night. It'd be miles better to have the duck bill one that's on the right there, who we think might be our man from the.
Well, Chris, I don't think you want to put on any of those masks.
No, but I'm just saying, like, you wouldn't choose that one, would you? If you were gonna go to a party, you'd be like, "Oh, this is rubbish. This one, it's gonna mold my face all night."
Yeah. Well, these are all like very Venetian masks, and I know that he went to great lengths trying to get these made, and some of them might have cost upwards of $10,000 making. This was a very important note of his, and again, it does feel theatrical. This movie has a very interesting feeling in comparison to a lot of Kubrick's earlier works, where things feel a lot more punctuated. It's not so, I don't know, seamless isn't the word that I want to use, but he was really doubling down on this whole kind of elevated world that these characters were inhabiting. And I think the mask intentionally, he went for this very theatrical Venetian look. And I want to say that they're pretty accurate. He went to great lengths, even the robes, getting sculptors and people to come in to recreate these moments for this film, very similar to the source material. And I know this he spent particularly a very long time on putting together.
I think that this refers back to as well, like in Venetian society, they had lots of masquerade balls, and there was, like, I remember reading about Casanova back in those days, and like, like the famous Venetian character, and Casanova used to go to all these kind of risque parties in Venice. So like way back when, we're not talking about this is something that's been going on for like centuries. This kind of cultish kind of cabal, kind of like whatever it is. And like maybe that's another thing with the Venetian masquerade masks as well. You know, it's referring back to that time of Casanova, and I think they had something as well called the pleasure machine at parties and things like that. It was like, you know, hidden rooms and stuff, which is exactly what we're talking about now, you know, in these parties. Anyway,
yeah. And when we speak to Jeffrey Epstein, we were just talking about this before. We've all seen the Prince Andrew like photos of this masquerade ball with the nude woman, very similar to what we see here in Eyes Wide Shut. And that was in the 90s. Those photos surfaced, you know, and we know that there's still these parties today. And we've heard about things like Bohemian Grove, where the elite come together and they do burn an effigy and wear these masks and put on costume. It's something that is through, I mean, society for a very long time, not just like a couple hundreds of years, thousands of years. Masquerade parties and putting on the proverbial mask is not something that is new to history. We've seen that in the Roman Empire. We've seen that through various empire itself. This is a concept that Kubrick really wanted to double down on here. I think there's a really interesting concept here that deals with the misogyny of the male perspective that Kubrick really wanted to talk about, in the way that men perceive women, that I think is a really interesting theme. The concept of men's desire coming in a physical form, right? We see Will Hartford go on this, you know, failed night odyssey where after learning about his wife's mental desires through a dream, he felt that he needed to go out into the night to go through a series of these almost failed attempts. But what's really interesting is Kubrick was speaking to the perspective of a man, and it really became apparent the last time I watched this film during that fight sequence where Tom Cruise's character is speaking to the way men look at women and how every man at that party wanted to have a piece of Nicole Kidman, if you will. And we see that in that conversation, which we're going to talk about here in a second. You see it on the right side here. It's this almost, you know, perspective of a man that you're married, and how I would have never thought, you know, after marrying you, you're mine. You're not going to go cheat on me. But little does he know that even the female can have a desire, and a desire might not manifest in the physical sense of actually going and doing it, but it manifests in Alice's world of having a dream that came with this sailor that she met, I believe, on a vacation trip many years ago, where she confronted Will, saying that day if he would have looked at her, she would have left for him. And there's this really like interesting descent into male psychology that I think Kubrick was trying to tap into, and probably his own honest perspective of himself and being a man and being married, and a man that we know that was super secretive and reclusive and would bring his family to all of the productions and was known to be on set. And there's a really interesting thing, and I don't want this to be damning for someone, but there was a said actor on Barry Lyndon that I learned about that potentially might have put a pass to Kubrick's daughter, which he's pulling from here, which is also one of the core themes of this admission of guilt of bringing his family so close to the fire, that something might have transpired where Kubrick literally wanted to fight this person and fire this person from the production. But obviously, to make the film and to wrap it out, Kubrick had to keep them on. But I don't know if this is true, if this story is like substantiated or not, but I do think that there's a potential of admittance to guilt, especially when him as a man's looking at this and looking at Will as Kubrick, this concept of male desire showing up in a physical form. You see this throughout the film as Alice, again, as we enter in the third act, as Will goes on this whole midnight odyssey, has another dream which runs parallel to Will's physical journey, which I find really interesting. And he does that so well throughout his film, speaking to the misogyny of the male experience, you know, and we see that in The Shining again with Jack, which is very much this vessel that speaks to a lot of the same core themes here. Kubrick always wanted to speak to the honesty of these characters. And another thing that was really interesting about Kubrick himself is he never positioned people as like bad or good. There was never a clear distinction of this is the protagonist, this is the antagonist. And he did that with his lack of coverage as well, and his one point perspective, where he was trying to show the objective truth of these characters and their objective honesty. And I think that's a really interesting thing that Kubrick always did in his filmmaking process, right? Yeah, super fascinating. What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
No, I was enjoying listening to you, to be honest. You know what I mean? It was really cool to hear that. And I was thinking all the way through this, it's about that idea of desiring something but not wanting to leave what you've got. You know what I mean? I mean, he doesn't actually cheat on his wife. It's all mentally the way that he cheats. You know what I mean? And the fact that he never actually sleeps with the prostitute. He's on the cusp of doing, but then she calls him. And in the same way, he doesn't do anything at the sex party. In fact, the whole thing is just a mental odyssey for him to go and see if he would be able to cheat. He's chasing his desires, but he's not actually getting hold of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's my perspective anyway. But yeah.
No, that's really well put, Chris. And I think that, you know, this is one of the many themes. And to kind of go into the scene breakdown where we'll talk a little bit more about this, we're going to go up shot by shot per sequence just to give our perspective of what's potentially happening here. And to just speak to some of the technical specs, Kubrick, this was actually something that I heard which was interesting for theatrical. Kubrick didn't love the way theatrical was being managed at the time, which was why someone was saying that he wanted this film to be delivered in 4:3. I don't know if that was the case. Kubrick loved 1:6:6. That was the aspect ratio of choice. He did that on most of his movies, and I think that was the same. But for this film, shot 1:3:1:1, 1:3:7:1 negative ratio, delivered theatrically in 1:6:6. And 1:8:5 in some other places, which is cool. He shot this on 35 millimeter. I believe the film stock was Eastman EXR 500T. He was using super speeds, probably a set of his own lenses that he procured through life. He was very much a photographer in his own right, started in his early career being a photographer, like almost a journalistic photographer for news. He shot, obviously, this production in UK, got the laboratory, which was deluxe and rank film. It was printed onto an AGFA 35 millimeter film. And something to know about Kubrick, he wasn't just a normal director. He was a cinematographer. He was a producer. He was highly technical. And in the interview with Larry Smith, he was talking about using, at the time, there was an 800 ASA stock, which I think might have been used on this film. I didn't want to put it in here just in case it wasn't. In Kubrick, which being being such a sensitive and high speed stock, he wanted to print down on that. And there was a big risk of doing that back then. And even the most talented cinematographer might not have taken that approach to be able to make the visuals in which he wanted to do. And that just speaks to the technical capabilities of Kubrick. Not only as an amazing storyteller, he was always fully in charge of what he wanted to have play out in camera, on screen for the audience. And this just shows that he was always thinking of unique ways to innovate with this film. And I believe this film was one of the earliest productions to have a digital tap outputting the set. Kubrick loved to be able to see the takes back and watch it and have proper playback on the production. He was a firm believer of bringing that to production. And honestly, if like Kubrick was alive, I'd be curious of what he would be using today. I think he would be along the lines potentially of maybe a David Fincher and utilizing digital in this capacity that film could have potentially been limiting it. But these are some of the specs and considerations for this movie. Super fascinating. And that takes us into the beginning of this movie. Dun, 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 dun. So
you've not even done the right song.
No, I know. That's later in the movie. But we know that this film starts with Alice and Will. They're getting ready for a party. They're in this dream world. They're social climbers. You can see they're leaving their daughter at home. They're getting ready. There's actually a really awesome moment where Alice asks Will how she's looking, and Will doesn't even look at her.
Yeah.
You know, another kind of doubling down again on kind of this male experience, the male perspective, not even needing to look. I'm just going to adhere to what my wife needs and give her that surface level comment. But even in the beginning of this world, we start to see some of the through line elements that will play into the real world and the dream world, and more importantly here, the dream world. And that is his utilization of the Christmas tree, Christmas ornaments, Christmas itself, this concept of holiday, which really only shows up in the dream world. We don't see this when Kubrick enters into the world of the elite. But anytime he's navigating this midnight odyssey in his own dream state, we constantly see this iconography coming through of Christmas itself. And something that I've always loved about the Christmas ornaments and what he like chose to put on screen is there's always this really like purple hue that plays through, this color of royalty, this color that's been associated with empire. And yeah, I don't know, Chris, what did you take away from the beginning of this movie before we get into this next sequence as we see them voyaging into what will be this event?
There was somebody who wrote about when she's getting changed, which we haven't got that picture because obviously, I mean, Ranger 7 Studios has said don't get a copyright strike. We hope we won't by having pictures on rather than video, but like we can't put this one up anyway because it'll completely take us down. But that one of Nicole Kidman when she's changing and she's got her back to us, you know what I mean? She's between two columns, and somebody said it's like something from the tarot, you know, and she's like this goddess-like figure, and even then he can't say, you know, he says, oh, you're perfect, even though he doesn't look at her like you said. And I thought it was fantastic. And also it introduces this element of mirrors as well, like they're looking at each other at points only through the mirror, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's a fascinating start. Also, in this scene that we're just looking at right here, they ask Helen, their kid, who's with the babysitter in the bottom left-hand corner. She asks if she can watch. Do you remember what she asks if she can watch, Brendan?
Would you say?
Quick trivia quiz. Do you remember what Helena asks what she can watch before she goes to bed? The Nutcracker. And what's the Nutcracker about? Any ideas? This is the fascinating bit for me. The Nutcracker's all about a little girl whose toy comes to life, and it's basically like a prince, a handsome prince, and she marries this prince. And that's the story of the Nutcracker. And I wondered if it was a Kubrickian drop-in, you know what I mean, about her wanting to watch this story about toys coming to life. And, you know, when you look at other things, like you look at The Shining and you look at the fact that he's got that pillow that's got a teddy bear on it and something, and then later on in The Shining upstairs with that sort of wealthy fella in the tuxedo, we see that bear that's come to life. And I thought about toys coming to life and this story. I thought, oh, her asking to stay up and watch the Nutcracker was symbolic or something that definitely kind of added to this dream world that we're about to go into.
Oh, most likely. And I mean, even speaking to the concept of the bear and what that means and how that shows up through some of his other films, I mean, we know what this subject matter is about. We know what Helen ultimately will play in this film. But yeah, I think Kubrick, everything had intention, whether it was the Nutcracker, the line, this Christmas tree, everything was pointing towards what he was trying to say in this film. And that concept of the bear is going to follow through in this movie very much so. Which takes us to this first party, which funny enough is
Sweeney. I'll be back in one second, all right? But don't go past Sander Sabo without me. I'm desperate to talk
absolutely.
about it. I'll be right back.
So this first scene, which is the party that Will and Alice end up going to, is this party. At first it seems very normal, just wealthy, aristocratic socialite type people, but then you come to realize that it's a little bit more than that. It's this swingers party, and you're rubbing elbows with what we call the Omni ones. And Sidney Pollack's character actually says something that is flirtatious towards Alice, where Will, I believe, says something along the lines of, does he do this with all of the women? And she essentially says yes, which lays the foundation for this concept of they're in this place which is starting to blur the lines between the dream world and the real world. And even in this dream world, this is what the Omni ones get to do, to have this party, to go outside their traditional relationship. And Will and Alice are very much not of that. They are, to my understanding, Will was a middle-class man who climbed himself up to this position that is more of a tool, right, to these Omni ones. But he has morals. He has conviction in his marriage. He has a daughter. And even though you get to see them kind of navigate this party and they separate off, and that's where Chris is going to come back to talk about the one character that Alice ultimately accompanies herself with, and then Will being with the two models, even though they're trying to be of this class, they're only being there to maybe get themselves aroused to ultimately go back and have sex themselves. But it's not like they're participating in the same way that Sidney Pollack's character does. And that's what I think is really interesting. And again, we see right behind them, what is that? The tree showing this dream world, using things like Christmas, using those types of imagery to be able to build out this dream world. And we have the Christmas lights lined against the wall. And to my understanding, they use predominantly just practicals to light a lot of this movie. And this was where Kubrick really wanted to be able to illustrate this concept of a painting, this soft glow. And he very much did that in this sequence. And as we go to the next shot here, focusing on the practicals, crafting this dream, Kubrick went to great lengths procuring practicals, changing out the bulbs, and having his own practicals that he would bring onto the production. If you watch the documentary with Lisa Leone, a lot of times it was pulling his own lighting from his own house to bring to set. You would see his lighting truck, it would be completely empty. Kubrick was obsessed about using specific lights, whether it was Barry Lyndon to light with candlelight, or it was A Clockwork Orange and using some of those long lighting throws to be able to create these dramatic shadows. And also what's really interesting, you see these almost like pentagram style wreaths or whatever this is. Super fascinating considering what this party is, who potentially a lot of these people are. That looks like Will and Alice here right in the beginning, but he wanted to create this really beautiful glow in this environment. And here's another character, which we'll come to talk a little bit more about, Nick Nightingale, or what is very emblematic of Nick. What is it in the podcast? He says it super Nachtigall, who is closer to the
in the Tram Novelle.
Yeah, Tram Novelle. So that's what I love about Kubrick, just to speak about the craftsmanship here. He's lighting on a whole other level and approaching a scene just so much different than how another filmmaker would.
Hey, Brenda, you'll be able to speak to this better than I can, but like those lights, sometimes he almost blooms them out, as Shane would say.
Yeah.
What is there a reason for that? Because right now this is all perfectly contained, and when Nick Nightingale's talking to him and when he's talking to Ziegler, those lights almost bloom out. Is that storytelling motif or not? I know it's not really shown in these pictures, but
yeah, let me see if I can find. Kind of like there.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what his approach was, or speaking directly to what
it's not accidental though.
Yeah, he definitely had intentionality behind all of this stuff. Whether he was using a special type of filtration to achieve this look, I'm not sure down to the granularity of that. but he definitely wanted to really create this dreamlike environment. And when you watch this, it's very tangible. It's very East Coast. I can feel the warmth in this environment, knowing that there's this cold exterior, and you see that a little bit later, the way that Tom Cruise's character is dressed. But he really went for that Christmas warmth in building that dream world.
Yeah, it's kind
And
of a
we have-
false warmth, isn't it?
Yeah,
Not
false
love
warmth.
there,
you
it's
could
more
say.
luxury. Yeah.
100%. And then we have this first introduction of Nick Nightingale, this character that was in med school with Will. He ultimately decided to depart, and now he resurfaces years later as a piano player, and who will ultimately kind of be this gatekeeper for Will to be able to access these parties that he otherwise would have not been able to. And again, here's this really interesting, almost pentagram, kind of satanic looking wreath. Very interesting. Kubrick knew what he was doing. And I think there is a very interesting photo with Ghislaine Maxwell that has a very similar object. Now, I don't know if Kubrick really knew of Ghislaine Maxwell at that time and what was going on with the Epstein stuff. Kubrick was always ahead of his time, and maybe he did, but I think this photo was taken in the 90s or early 2000s with a symbol or some time of home decor that was very similar. And we can only assume what Kubrick was really trying to say with this, right?
Yeah, Nick Nightingale's got his back to it, ironically, which is when the orgy scene comes, he's got his back to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where, when we get to see Nick Nightingale later, he's obviously blindfolded at this point. So this is a party where swinging, or even in the 70s, key parties, which is what they were typically more called, you know, he gets to be a part of this, and he doesn't have to be blindfolded to the truth. And this is the dream layer. Even in this environment, it's still the dream layer, but then we'll be able to see when they go to the second floor, when Will's ushered up to meet with Victor, he's no longer in the dream world, he's in the real world. And I know, Chris, you're super excited to talk about this conversation between this character, which is emblematic of the Omni one, this guy who does not care about the moral boundaries of marriage and is not interested in her even being married to Will. He drinks the cup of hers, which is a very long-standing tradition of saying, I want to have sex with you, when you grab the drink of someone else and drink out of it. And Chris, I know that you could speak to this even better than I can.
No, man, this guy's my favorite character in the whole thing, just because of his creepiness. You know, it's really odd how he says to us. She says something like, "Oh, I think that's my drink," when he's drinking out of it, and he goes, "Oh, I'm almost certain of it," and it's just slimy. You know what I mean? But yeah, he's of this level where he doesn't really seem to care how slimy he is. But one of the things that I noticed when I watched this scene again was he references Ovid. He says very early on in the conversation, "How well do you know your Ovid?" or something along those lines, right? I've got it here, actually. Let me find it. Oh yeah, he says, "Did you ever read the Latin poet Ovid?" Right? And Ovid came about in sort of 43 AD. All right, so we're talking 2,000 years ago. Here's the interesting thing about Ovid, because I studied Ovid when I was at university, right? Ovid was exiled from Rome. He was a Roman poet. He lived in Rome. He loved Rome. It was his home. It was his favorite city in the world. It was like us living in Los Angeles and loving Los Angeles, despite its foibles. He loved Rome. And he was exiled by the Emperor Augustus, so one of the first emperors in Rome's history. He exiled him in like 43 AD because of two things. One was called Carmen, and the other one was Carmen, and the other one was Errore, or error, right? So Carmen was a poem that he wrote that was called the Ars Amatoria, the art of love. And it was this kind of story about being adulterous and being lecherous and getting involved in, you know, like multiple, like group sex and things like that. And he wrote about all this stuff in these poems called the Ars Amatoria, the art of love. And then that was the Carmen, so that was the poem that he got exiled for. But the other thing that he got exiled for was called errore, which was the error, the mistake. And what Ovid wrote about, because he wrote letters to Augustus to invite him back to Rome, saying, "Please let me come back." And what he wrote about in these letters to Augustus was, "I'm really sorry for my Carmen and my error." And the error was the mistake. And he alludes to in these letters that he'd seen the emperor's children, the emperor's granddaughter, involved in some illicit activity, some scandal. right? And he'd written about it, or he'd been involved in it. So Augustus banned him from Rome, exiled him for the Art of Love book, which was again all about swinging and everything, and the error, the mistake, which was, as I said, seeing something he shouldn't have seen in the rich folks of Rome, the very highest echelons of Rome. So it's very much foreshadowing what we're going to see in this film. And it's this guy, Sander Sarbo, who talks about it. The other crazy thing is in the very next line, he talks about Bonnard. He says, let me take you upstairs and show you some, some, whatever it is, statues or something, right? Some Baroque statues. And she says, no, I don't think my husband would like that. And then he says, well, they've got a great Bonnard collection. And Bonnard was this artist who painted naked women in the bath and in the bathroom and stuff, right? He painted a lot of other things, but that was one of the things he painted. And he got involved in a massive scandal as an artist by cheating on his wife and having an affair with a young model who, when he ended it with her, she killed herself. So we have this kind of like these links that this guy's referring to in this very first time that Alice has been spoken to properly at this party. He is basically alluding to these salacious activities that the very high echelons of society get involved in. And yeah, I just thought that was fascinating. This guy, Sander Sarbo from Hungary, basically lets the cat out of the bag from the very first conversation with Alice. He's effectively inviting her to do this stuff. And I thought that's my favorite bit of the film.
No, that's so true. He is emblematic of the first Omni one outside of Sidney Pollack's character, Victor, which we end up going into a deeper dive. We get to see that they operate in a whole other level, and especially with the way that he's essentially courting her to be able to go look at this gallery. And this is where she speaks to who she is as a failed manager or curator at an art gallery, and that he can help fix that, and that they should go to this other floor. He's a great first examination into this world that they're ultimately going to descend into further. Mm-hmm. Which then we have Will, on the other hand, is with these two models, and obviously they're saying the famous line of seeing what's going to be at the end of the rainbow, and that's what ultimately keeps coming back more and more, is this concept of this rainbow, and that the Omni ones can be able to see what's at the end of it, which is the ultimate temptation, desire, lust, right? And that's what Will ultimately is on this journey. But we get to see where these characters were at the beginning of the swingers party together, slowly drift apart. When he has to go to the bathroom, she's going to get a drink in this environment that separates them and doesn't care about the moral fabric of their relationship and the marriage that ties them together in this world, which is still the dream world. And again, when we look, we see all of these Christmas lights, they're still in the dream world, even though this is now where the elite are, where the elite potentially reside. It is still this dream state where they're not going to get implicated for the actions like we'll see in the real world. Until we ultimately get into Zegler's, I don't know if this is his office or what this space ultimately is in relationship to him. I don't remember if this is his house. Do you, Chris?
I think it is his house, and it's weird because we meet him and his wife literally like a few minutes before this, because she's the one who's in the red dress when they greet him out the door, right? And it's like this point here, he's putting his pants back on and he's welcoming Bill into the room, isn't he? So it's very strange, but it is his house, I believe. I mean, it says that in the script, it's his house, it's Ziegler's party, so yeah.
Yeah. And what's great is this is the first time, right, where we have all of this imagery of Christmas lights, blue lights, this intrusion of the dream, this dream state that they're all living in, people living with eyes wide shut, until we get into our first instance of being in the real world. And this character here in particular is someone that is going to be playing a major part as we enter into the orgy sequence and ultimately the third act. But in this scenario, Zegler's character, who was with his wife, ended up having, sex with this model, potentially. I mean, she is a model, and she took dope or something, and ultimately,
Coke,
I think OD.
Said an 8-ball or something, I think he said.
Yeah, and then that required Will, this man that's climbing the social order, to ultimately be a resource. And this is what puts him in good faith with someone like Zegler. His goal, Will, is meant to get closer to these individuals and to hopefully be able to go into this position of power or whatever that means to him as a character, and him being able to help him and say, hey, you know, you did not see this, let's not speak to it. Will kind of carries that potentially as a badge of honor where he's going to be a resource to these people. And this is the first instance of us entering into this real world where the moral compass is askew. And this is a great example of there's no metaphorical imagery here. Kubrick is not trying to say that this is a woman that is underage. This is very much someone that is potentially love age. And I think this is where Kubrick does have a deviation. And that's interesting in comparison when we think about actually, I take that back. That's something that I wanted to use for this scene with the prostitute. But I still don't think that Kubrick here, right, is trying to say that this is someone that's underage, but she's at the party, even though she ultimately,
wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
This is like this is sort of like the beginning of this kind of downfall. We're going to see like this, what we think is the most sordid thing, which is effectively somebody dying at a party of an overdose, which happens ironically in Babylon, right? But like having that early on, you know what I mean? It's kind of like what we think, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could happen in this movie. Oh my God, you know, the whole movie's now going to be about, you know, trying to cover this up or something. Then he wakes her up and then, you know, we start to see the real sordid side of society. You know what I mean? As we go further and further down the rabbit hole, you know, and we go to the rainbow costume house and we see what happens there, and we go to the orgy and we see what happens there. You know, this is just the first kind of taster of a sordid underworld, you know.
Cameron made an interesting point. He said he thought it was particularly interesting that he said she shot up and they just went right past it. That is interesting. This scene definitely kind of sets the tone, right? Enters us into this real world.
It's the first time, sorry for interrupting, it's the first time that he's asked, innit? Like, it's the first time that Bill's asked to keep a secret. You know what I mean? And he even keeps it from his wife. He lies to Alice about it. He doesn't tell Alice, oh yeah, some girls OD'd upstairs. He doesn't say any of that. So it's the first time he's asked to keep a secret from his wife in the film. Anyway, you know what I mean? And I think that's an interesting element. And it's what kind of leads to a lot of distrust between them, you know?
Yeah, yeah. This obviously takes us from the party scene as, you know, he enters into this real world, keeps this secret. They ended up reconnecting, heading back. This is their sex scene. Obviously, the very infamous music that was from the trailer plays over this. An awesome needle drop by Kubrick as they enter. You know, they essentially allow themselves to get aroused by this dream world, this swingers party. They do not act. They're of moral good. They're of their relationship. They can still frequent these parties as a social climber, but they're not going to act upon it like everyone else does. This is where they act upon it, which then brings them into this conversation as they analyze their relationship. What ultimately played out is Nicole Kidman asked if he had sex with those models, for him to ultimately lie, saying that he had to answer a call from Zegler. It doesn't really express what ultimately happens there, but then turns the conversation around on Alice about the way men look at her. And this starts to break down that whole concept of the way men look at women as essentially their territory. And in this case, you know, I don't think Will is doing that because he's a man of malice. I think he's just short-sighted potentially, and you kind of see that. He wants to be like the Omni ones, where Will is this man that came from nothing and has now made himself something. We saw the character, why can't I think of his name? The Hungarian man.
Sander Sarbost.
Yeah, Sander. He's the suave guy. He's the one that can pull a woman. He has no problem. He is the Omni one. And we see that time and time again later throughout the film, especially when he's talking to the one prostitute. He is not the cool man, even though he's cool and he has an awesome job and he's this man of power being a doctor. He's not the man that's like the Omni ones. And I think we see that at least start to be here with his short-sightedness as a man. And this carries on into this really deep conversation. And what I love about this is where we see the blue really coming into Lost. And it really starts to take over in the later frames, especially in the film as he returns from this night odyssey and the dream world is fully taken over and converged with the real world. But this conversation's awesome, you know. And again, Kubrick's doubling down on this dream imagery, and here where Kidman goes for a monologue and talks about what her dreams were, and ultimately we see a little bit of what this dream was with this sailor. But very fascinating scene. And this is ultimately the turning point of the film that plunges him, or Will, shall we say, into this kind of state of trying to look for something more and to maybe act on his desires as the way that she did, even though her desires more manifested in a dream, right? What
Yeah.
did you take away from this scene, Chris?
I literally just wrote down here because I've got my post-its with me so I can remember what to say when I'm listening to what you're talking about, because it's absolutely fascinating that I thought to myself, is this you know, you've said about the blue lights coming in now after they've had sex and everything like that. Is this where their minds are going while they're fucking? You know what I mean? Sorry to say it like that, but that's what it feels like. You know what I mean? This is the dream state that they go into, and they're, you know, sort of getting off on making each other jealous almost, or she gets off on making him jealous. Wouldn't you think so?
Yeah.
I think that's where. Sorry, go on.
No, go for it.
I think that's what she does here when she gets high and then she starts telling him about the naval officer, like you eloquently outlined before. I think that that's her sort of seeing how jealous he is, because that's the only time she gets the attention she wants from him. You know what I mean? Because she doesn't get it at the beginning when she's asking him if she looks good. But now that she's saying, oh, all these guys wanted to be with me, it's kind of, that's her getting the attention that she always wanted from her husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's right.
I think that's 100% true. I think that it's really an interesting examination of the female experience and the female perspective and how desire is for a woman. And traditionally speaking, I think for a long time, we did not perceive, or men did not, we should say, perceive the female desire to be the same as man, until she kind of divulges that she would have left Will if that sailor would have just looked at her. You know, in the same way a man might have crumbled to an attractive woman that would have spent the time talking to him, right? And I think that is where the fabric of Will's identity starts to tear. And we see this moment that ultimately is the turning point, push him down this realization of what their marriage is, and desire and infidelity. And again, like, these characters haven't even done anything yet, nor through the whole runtime of this film do anything or act upon it in any manner. If anything, Nicole Kidman's character is the one that gets closest to it, but even still, it's in her mind. Actually, Tom Cruise is the one that gets closest to it in the physical sense, but in action, Nicole's is the only one that actually illustrates that, where Tom Cruise doesn't even get remotely close to acting upon it. Maybe the second time when he tries to revisit to the prostitute when she's not there, he does get quite close with that next character, but it's a very fascinating scene.
The way that he moves on as well. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, go for it.
The way that he moves on as well, you know, when you think about it, he's not willing to divulge anything about his fantasies or anything like this. When she's saying to him, oh, how about, you know, the women at your office? How about this? How about those two girls that you were with at the party? She's trying to push him on these things, and he's not willing to take her up on it. And at the end, he's saying, I'll tell you everything. You know what I mean? He's finally willing to open up. He's so closed off to begin with. Now he's open at the end. And that's what I noticed about that scene when, you know, when she's asking him all those questions to try and push him. And then eventually she's the open one. She's the one who tells about her fantasies and desires and about this naval officer that we're now seeing on the screen in black and white.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. I love the way that he illustrates the dream sequence, so different than the rest of the film. Very much a choice in this almost monochromatic look. Super fascinating. I don't know what he was trying to go with this. I haven't spent enough time dissecting, but it's very different than the rest of the movie. And by, like, you know, I think by design, he wants to speak to an even deeper layer of the subconscious, this almost Freudian perspective here. Very fascinating.
Yeah, because he's building it all up in his mind, isn't he, as well? You know?
Yeah, and this is very much from Tom Cruise's perspective, right? It's Will's perspective. This is his character seeing. I doubt that this is how it played out in Nicole or Alice's mind, right? Super fascinating. And then again, as he's about to enter into this dream world after the news, we see the Christmas light imagery come back in and he's on his way out the door, and it's a man coming to grass with his wife's actions. And what's really interesting is what I heard from Lisa Leone when they were looking for taxi cabs. Kubrick was like, I want to get a chubby checker because those are big, allowing room. And at that time, because Kubrick was so far removed from living in New York City, he didn't realize that the chubby checker was no longer a cab that was like actively operating in Manhattan, which they had those new cabs in the 90s. And he was super disappointed because very much like, what is the name of the cab that's in like London, the black one?
Oh
Very,
yeah,
very famous.
Hackney carriage.
Yeah, those have a
Yeah,
lot of
Hackney
room.
carriage.
Yeah, it's just like a fun note that Kubrick was always looking for something specific, but was very disappointed that, you know, New York City discontinued the very famous chubby checker, the one that was a Taxi Driver and through so many movies. But that was very interesting.
Brendan, can I ask you something? Right? Do you think
Yeah.
that he filmed it like Kubrick better than I do probably, and obviously New York, everybody's talked about it, how he didn't want to fly or whatever it was that he didn't want to go over there. But do you think that Kubrick, there's a reason for him using a projection and doing all that kind of stuff and presenting New York in the way he did, other than the fact that he didn't want to go to New York to film it? Do you think that it's all in keeping with this kind of dreamlike craziness that you never really feel like you're actually there?
I think that's 100% what he went for. I mean, granted, of course, he wasn't interested in traveling, and he, of course, did all of his movies from 2001 onward in the UK and shooting at Pinewoods and building sets. I think this film very much he wanted to play on that dreamlike state, that dreamlike quality, that New York, he wanted to have this deviation. And I know we see that in some of the imagery here, like you're saying, this rear projection that's super popular or like wild, like well discussed, I should say. And, you know, at the time, people thought maybe this was something that he ran out of money or after death, they put in the film because they broke down all of the sets and stuff. But we know Kubrick would have found a way to be able to recreate what he was going for. And I think all of it plays in the psychology of, or the mental state of Will's character, especially here. But speaking to New York, I think it was all about the dream world that he was trying to build. You know, he wanted to have it be this almost uncanny feel of navigating Manhattan, right? So it's a fever dream almost. And when you look at some of these photos, you can tell, even look at the sets, it's easy, it feels theatrical. It does not feel like Manhattan. This does not seem like the Manhattan that I've been to or the Brooklyn that I've been to or any part of New York that I've been to. It's very different. And Kubrick went to great lengths with Lisa Leone and with Leon Vitali and other people to studying Manhattan. And I believe there was like a really famous interview where Kubrick would have a photographer, I believe it was Lisa, maybe not, set up a ladder. He said, I need you to take the photo from this height, and then I need you to move the ladder over X amount of like distance, get back up, take another photo. And he would create these almost really long panoramic images of streets of Manhattan to be able to then take them to replicate. And we see that here. He went to great lengths studying, designing, and building, and he never built exactly to anything specific. I mean, this comes off like Greenwich Village, especially in the 90s. I remember going to New York as a kid, and there was a lot of these costume shops and sex shops and underground bars and more of the seedy aspects of Manhattan that was still running around that time. And Greenwich Village now is a lot different just because of NYU. It's been cleaned up. But even again, it was always this place where you would go see music, go to a place like the Sonata Cafe. I've spent a lot of time there. So it wasn't too far removed, but it was never quite like the Manhattan of today, or at least the Manhattan of that time. And I would say that's what Kubrick was trying to go for. Now, he'd probably have a lot more depth to that, but for, you know, at least the film, I think that he's trying to speak to this almost fever dream or this eyes wide shut type of dream world that these characters inhabit, you know. And I think this is another really great scene that Kubrick navigates so well that when you watch it without the perspective that we're adding, it's like, why does Kubrick go and introduce these characters who likely this is someone that Will services? It's a gentleman that he has likely had run through his practice. He gets a house call that he's dying, and there's the daughter that he ultimately has this weird encounter with, where she wants to run away with him. And even though her husband is an attractive teacher, he just happens to just be that very vanilla, not as interesting, wants to move to Michigan. And I think this is a really interesting place where we see the perspectives of all of these groups. Again, look at their home. They're definitely of that social class, the elite class. These are people with money in Manhattan. But Will looks at her the same way that the elite class that we come to see later, the Ziegler types, and the way that they look at him, and he almost looks down at this woman, is almost pathetic, someone that he would never do that with. And Kubrick just does such an amazing job of navigating these different scenes that seem almost ancillary, but speak to the world that they're trying to inhabit, or the characters that inhabit these worlds. What are your thoughts when you first watched this?
No, I think you're right. I think that, first of all, I was looking at that bed and thinking it looks like at the end of 2001, like all the Venetian kind of looking stuff. So that's Kubrick almost making a reference to his own work. But also, I found her behavior so strange in this whole bit, and I thought that Tom Cruise looking at her with such kind of weirdness in his eyes, I thought it was more him experiencing emotion of somebody who's just lost somebody, you know what I mean, and seeing almost how, because she tries to kiss him almost immediately, doesn't she? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or there's a point where she's trying to kiss him, and it's like, I thought maybe that's him seeing what marriage really is, you know what I mean? Which is once one's gone, you just move on, you know what I mean? And that also kind of feeds into his character and the way that he's behaving. Yeah.
I would agree with that. No, it's a super interesting scene. I actually want to spend more time with this scene in particular after this, just to be able to like get into what goes on. I feel like this one is one of like the few scenes that's not talked about a lot. It does feel like it comes out of left field, but even with that podcast and revisiting some of the other stuff, I feel like Kubrick does such a great job of showing the different perspectives of the different like people and where they stand in this hierarchy and in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, again, social hierarchy, we see this character who comes from this cut of cloth, but is almost like desperate to get away, to leave with Will and to reset their life. But obviously, Will barely even knows this individual outside of the calls that he's likely had with the father. And then we go back to this like amazing world, right? The one that we talked about that feels fabricated and fake. And we can see again, what do we have? This purple hue, these Christmas lights, speaking to this dream world, the stuff that Kubrick was using along with his team to be able to double down on that as he gets deeper and deeper. We continue to see this imagery play out. And I love this photo. It just shows how much they put into this film. And it's a really weird movie, right? To have so much time and money spent on a film that's not like VFX heavy. It's not like massive set pieces. It's about a man walking through the streets of New York, and it's about a party. But I love the detail, right?
It wouldn't happen these days. That's the saddest thing. You know what I mean? Kubrick needed time, and the studio afforded him that time because they knew they were going to get something that was masterful. And I don't think that happens these days outside of somebody like a Nolan who can go off for 8 months and make the Odyssey.
And even Nolan's, right? He's working on such a high level of entertainment. Like, of course, this movie is entertaining for us, but for a lot of people, it's very much just a character piece. It's a character study, and the plot is very simple. Like Nolan, it's like it makes sense why his movies are so expensive. And even though Kubrick's movies were expensive, he was always so good at keeping his budgets lower because he didn't work with massive crews, and he operated as the director, the producer, the editor, the writer. He was the one focused on making a lot of this stuff happen, which goes to, and that's something that I think is really interesting to take away with being a good director. And I don't think you need to go be Kubrick. I mean, none of us are Kubrick, right? He's operating on a whole other level. But to be a good director, and even David Fincher says this well, it's like you have to be a good producer. And I think Kubrick shows the importance of being a good producer only makes you a better director, because you know what you want to ask for, and you're the ones putting in the work, and you're not just getting random stuff to fill your scenes. And that's what I love anytime I dissect Kubrick. It shows what the ability of one human can be. And I'm all for collaboration. This does not mean that you should go be a dictator on set and, you take all of the glory. That's not exactly the point. But for someone like Kubrick, who was the ultimate collaborator, but also knew what he wanted, it's just awesome to be able to see someone like him or the Soderbergh types or the David Fincher types or the Lynn Ramsey types. These people that are great filmmakers are just ultimately really great producers as well. You know?
Here. I couldn't have said it better myself.
And I said this earlier, Lisa Leone took thousands of photos. I highly recommend. I think this documentary is on YouTube. If you go to Criterion's channel, it's just a short interview about her time with Kubrick and what it ultimately led for her being on this film and getting enlisted and flown out to the United Kingdom to be able to partake in this production. But she went through it. She spent a lot of time manufacturing this film, the look, the scenes, the settings. And this person in particular, I want to put a lot of light on because I feel like until recently, she wasn't as known in this production process. This is another interesting scene, and I would love to hear your take on it. We have these young boys. They're definitely all in college, all wearing, Yale merchandise or clothing or hats. And they come through and they really speak to just being the youth, right? You say things that you might not mean. You're not kosher. You're not polite. And they're just walking down, calling him a lot of different slurs and names and speaking, to specific segments of sexuality. And someone broke it down, and I think you heard this too, about how this is the perspective of the young elite, people that don't know how to act proper in the dream world, right? These are the people that have not learned how to bite their tongue, even though they're going to go on to be the next elite. And this is just a concept of what Kubrick's speaking to in the various perspectives and this idea of even the elite at a younger age, and something that Will has to address and face in this almost dream state as he's navigating this night odyssey. It is, again, another character or a scene or sequence that feels ancillary to the plot. It's like, why do these characters come and almost confront and push by Will, pressing him into the car and saying all of these things? But when you first saw this, what were your thoughts on it, Chris?
I was thinking that, one thing that Kubrick does really well is about de-individualization. I think that's the word. If it's not, then I've just made it up and it's a great word. De-individualization. He does it with the soldiers putting their uniforms in Full Metal Jacket. It stops them being the individual. And I think one thing that he has as a really cool theme that runs throughout his stuff, throughout all of his films, is this idea of the collective. When you come together as a collective, you can do some horrible things together. I think that this is almost like the first scene where we're seeing that. These guys individually wouldn't walk along the street and call him, it's kind of a homophobic slur in it, what they called him, and they started shouting at him. It wouldn't have happened if it had been individuals, but because they're here as a group of young men, then, I think that that's one of the reasons that they do it. And the other thing I thought of was the Bullingdon Club, which, if you've never heard of the Bullingdon Club, it was one that was kind of like these young men in the Britain, which had lots of ex-prime ministers in it and lots of, lords and ladies in it and all this kind of stuff. And they were, when they were young and they were at university, and they would go around and deliberately smash up cars and just pay for them with money because they knew they couldn't get in trouble for it. You know what I mean? And it was things like that because they used their wealth to say, oh, I can't get in trouble, so I'll just do X, Y, and Z and do horrible things. And in fact, I think it's Kubrick referencing them in Clockwork Orange, but you also see it here with
so
this
true.
big group of Yale students,
Wow, that's so true. Yeah. Yeah, that
It
is
shows
definitely
they don't
feels,
care that they're in trouble.
Yeah, that's so true. I've never thought about that in relationship to A Clockwork Orange. That's really good, Chris. I love that. And again, you see, what do we see in the windows, the Christmas lights, the stuff that's not found in the real world, but is found in this dream world, this manufactured world, this world that's capitalistic, this world that is run by the elite, and this world that also has the children of the elite potentially running through this playground, this dream world. And again, feels theatrical, doesn't feel like the New York City we know, doesn't feel like the corner of some place in Greenwich Village that we've walked by. And this ancillary scene that plays so well in kind of this natural hierarchy where Will's been climbing up, even he is not on the same level of someone so young. And then this which takes us, he eventually gets courted by this woman who comes off like a prostitute, especially with the way that she's dressed. I feel like Kubrick had such attention to detail in this manner with the wardrobe specifically, and having her dress to stand out, be punctuated. But what was the color that he chose? This color of royalty, this color of purple that plays through so much of, to speak to purple, I don't think I've ever seen Christmas lights one that look like this. I don't know if anyone else has, but I've never seen Christmas lights that have this purple, maybe this blue, this green, sure. But this purple and yellow, definitely not something that I've seen. And what I
all
love
the colors
about
of the rainbow.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. All the colors of a rainbow. And what I love about this, before we even speak to this character and what she brings to the story, is one, we see Will, who is not good at having these conversations. He's not the one, even though he's on this odyssey and this one that's kind of built on desire and based on what he just learned from his wife, even in this place where he feels like he might even be allowed to, be with another woman. He's still not good at it. And I think that's what's so funny, thinking about the audience that came in thinking this film was going to be all about sex. And then they find out it's about this man who is almost like incapable of taking that next step due to his own moral code. I also love that Will, who operates in these lofty apartments, probably 15-foot high ceilings in beautiful Manhattan apartment complexes, and he goes into this home that's cramped and been painted over so many times, and you can see it. It's like, we all know what it's like to live in a basic apartment, especially in Los Angeles. Everyone's walls looks like they've been painted over 1,000 times from the 1,000 other people that have lived there before, and that's what this is. It's cramped. There's not a lot of places to go, but hey, her and her roommate are making the best of it, and we still see this dream world permeating this space and this moral hurdle for Will. This is essentially hurdle number 2, where another woman was thrown at him. He said no, and then there's this potential for a prostitute, for them to do this exchange that ultimately leads to him just paying her off and giving her some money. And Alice calls while they're in here, and this is what Alice is doing, living in this alternative dream state, just watching the TV, escaping into another reality, just reading the newspaper and enjoying her night while Will is in this scenario. I love how these are pinned against they're pinned against each other here, right? And what's interesting is this looks to be a window, and Kubrick probably had some reason. Maybe this is where the real world was blurring. It's like, we look at this scene where there's so much blue light, it's very theatrical coming in from the exterior, illustrating this almost dreamlike world. We don't get that here, and I wonder if there's a reason why in some of these other exteriors Kubrick didn't want to double down on this blue light, or even in these interiors here. That's interesting looking at these photos. You can
see the rainbow colors coming in.
Yeah, and we're speaking in real time here. It's interesting that we don't get that here, and I'm curious to why that's not happening. But then when we have the cut to Alice before she calls him, very, very interesting in why that's like that. And Steven said, I thought it was Kubrick's view of not being in control or feeling powerless. That's probably in relation to the young Yale men that they end up confronting with. But yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah. And guys, thanks so much for being a part of the call. I know we've been at this for a while, and a lot of you are watching YouTube side and platform side, and we really appreciate it through all the technical difficulties. But it's been super fun being able to speak to this movie and going shot to shot.
I mean, I can keep going,
Oh, dude.
Those 4 cups of coffee are making the way through me, but I'm good. I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love this scene. This is a great scene to be able to see Will's inability, but he's still there. He's still on this odyssey, right?
There's one thing that she has that you've not got in any of your shots, but when he goes into her bedroom, she has the purple sheets, which are very similar to the sheets that he has on his bed with Nicole Kidman, with Alice, right? They're both purple sheets, which again is your reference to purple. But the other thing is that she has a stuffed tiger on her bed, and we only see them at the end in the toy store. And I often think, I ever since I saw that, I've now linked Domino to Helena, Tom Cruise's kid, or Bill and Alice's kid in this, just because of that tiger being in there, or it being this is what she grew up to be. You know what I mean? This person who got a stuffed tiger when she was a kid. I think that's a really interesting bit.
No, that's super fascinating. Yeah.
You'll see it in the
Yeah.
toy store at the end.
Yeah. And then we go to this exterior after this whole mishap happens. If you remember earlier in the film, Nick Nightingale invites him to come out to the Sonata Cafe where he's going to be playing. And I love this exterior. I feel like Kubrick was really playing off of an interesting concept here, and we ultimately return to this area later in the film, especially Gillespie's, which is the diner that he enters into when he's trying to figure out what ultimately happened to Nick Nightingale after this orgy. But what's super fascinating is this bouncer that's up front. And for those that have ever been to Manhattan, a lot of these jazz cafes, sure, they might have a bouncer, but not one that's dressed this nice in this really nice button-up shirt with the bow tie and, you know, his winter jacket as things are colder. And we see Nick Nightingale is there listed to play. And it goes to show that Nick Nightingale is likely entrenched into this society a little bit deeper than we all realize. Even though he's getting blindfolded, he's obviously getting brought to these places of power and these places that where the elite, the omni ones are. And this again feels super theatrical. It doesn't feel exactly like the Manhattan we know or the Manhattan we visit today or the Manhattan of the 90s. And it's cool. What's interesting is the way that even from the beginning frame of Tom Cruise approaching the Sonata Cafe, we can see that he is being clocked by this bodyguard and watched every step of the way. And he gets in. And I don't even think there's really much discussion to him getting in. The door opens, he welcomes him in, and he enters into the Sonata Cafe. But it's almost as if he has this invite already to be able to enter into this world. And I love that we see, again, Kubrick kind of having this whole framework here of this rainbow, follow the rainbow. Where does the rainbow take you? Sonata Cafe being this next step will ultimately end up at Rainbow Rentals here soon. But this was that next step. This is the gate for Will's character, essentially, to be able to enter into what will be the real world. And as we go inside, go for it, Chris.
No, I was going to say, do you think that the rainbows are sort of when he's chasing his illusions or chasing, you know, the dream itself, and he's starting to? Do you think that's what it is? Every time we see the rainbow, it's him sort of chasing after this thing.
Yeah, I think it's potentially him wanting to know how far he can go to the other side of the rainbow as well. You know, I think the rainbow is almost like a proverbial bridge, right? You think of leprechauns and chasing the rainbow and what's on the other end of a rainbow, a pot of gold, but in this sense, maybe something far more sinister and taboo, the thing that only the omni ones can have or capable of getting. And to him, I don't think he realizes what the rainbow is. And I don't think it's manifesting in a logical sense for him, but I think it's more of a portal or a bridge that he embarks on, whether willing or knowing or not, right? And I think that Kubrick speaks to that as well. Sometimes we end up in scenarios that we don't realize, or we're unaware of maybe the impact of society around us in some of the venues. And even in this podcast, it's the Judge of Movies episode 4, he talks about living in LA and operating in the music scene and how much of this is true and how much you can speak to that entertainment is always just everyone trying to chase and climb the social ladder, and they'll do whatever it takes to get there. And not that they're knowing of what they're doing, but in this case, you know, Will is on this path and this journey of desire and despair, almost on this parallel timeline. And he made a really good point in the podcast. And I think we've all seen or experienced this when going to a party, or even the first time we go to a party. It's you know, we go to the first party with this innocence, but how quickly and how long does it take for some to do that first drug? They might see the people that they invited and they're doing coke, you know, I'll never do that. And then smash cut to a month later, you're the one then sending the next pass around or whatever it might be. It's so easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is what the cool kid does, I'm going to do that too. And I think in this case, for Will's character, he's following that logical social ladder. And, you know, I know the motive for him going to the Sonata Cafe is ultimately to meet with Nick, but at this point, what does Will potentially know about Nick? And I don't think he knows much, maybe at this point, right?
No, because Will hasn't told him anything really about what he does
outside
of this. He just said that I'm a cheap pianist and they pay for me to do this. And we know
Yeah.
that Nick go, that's it, Nick failed, didn't he? Because Nick went to medical school but didn't pass or didn't get through. So Nick's kind of like, Nick's what Bill could have been if he hadn't been a professional or if he hadn't been a doctor, I think. I think that's the way we're looking at it anyway. But yeah, let's get into the Sonata Cafe. Let's get to the best conversation in the whole film.
Yeah, I love this scene. And what's awesome right here is if you look in between Nick Nightingale or Nocturnal and Will Harford here, there's a gentleman sitting in the back, and you see him right to the left side as you're coming in. I actually didn't even realize this until recently. My wife, Kira, who I think is watching, she actually pointed this out. But this is Kubrick himself. He's sitting here to the left in the bench, and it's hard to see.
I didn't even notice.
Yeah, but if you rewatch this scene, Kubrick has a cameo, which is something that is oddly rare for Kubrick to put himself on screen, and especially in an extra capacity. And I'm really curious if this is Kubrick's admission to guilt or admission to operating in these spaces or these worlds, right? We talked about that earlier, that there's this potentially almost semi-autobiographical component to this film. And these are all assumptions and kind of playing into the larger conspiracy and mystery of this movie, but Kubrick himself put himself in this film and likely put himself in for some reason. What is that exact reason? I don't know. But I think it's quite fascinating.
Mate, I mean, this is the scene where Nick Nightingale basically opens up Bill to a whole other echelon. You know what I mean? And it's the same time that Kubrick is opening our eyes to a whole other echelon of society and partying and stuff like that. I think that this is exactly that. And I tell you what, well done, Kira, good spot, because that I have never noticed that in my life. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know what, we could even, and what's interesting, Chris, is we could even make the argument here that maybe if this is this admission to guilt and Kubrick did end up in a scenario like this, maybe he had his own Nick Nightingale moment where he met at a cafe like this and he is only replicating what happened to him. Or maybe he was the viewer of something that was happening along these lines. You know, I'm only applying logic to what this could potentially mean, but it's awesome that Kubrick entered the frame and he's forever in this scene. But speaking of the Sonata Cafe, on the inside we still see this dream world state, the same themes that are carried through in the imagery. We have these Christmas lights that are a part of this dream world, the world that we all live in, the world that has holiday, the world that also the Omni ones live in, but potentially fabricate it for us commoners, the ones that are not privy to what's on the end of the rainbow here. And that is the gatekeeper. And I love this shot. This shot is everything. This shot is where things start to get interesting. The concept of Nick Nightingale being this gatekeeper that's allowing Will, an old buddy, a med school friend, to know that there's something even crazier that he's a part of, and he had that he does every weekend or every so often whenever these happen, where he gets flown out and driven out to these extravagant events where he has to put on a blindfold. But he admits to one time they didn't put the blindfold on so tightly and he saw something. And what's really interesting, considering the perspective of this movie and the subject matter and what Kubrick was ultimately trying to speak to but couldn't necessarily show, is we almost see this weird excitement from Nick Nightingale's character, almost as if he liked what he saw. And of course, if you look at it through the lens of what's actually shown, you know, maybe one could make the case, but knowing that this deals with the Omni ones, the ones that are looking for the taboo, the thing that no one else is allowed to have but them, the Jeffrey Epstein types. Nick Nightingale, it's almost as if he was a part of this. And I don't know if you had any time to maybe research into how he is as a character in this world, but it feels like he is this amoral. He kind of straddles the line of being in the dream world and this gatekeeper and this almost funnel into the real world, to the world where the Omni ones are. And he really loves being that, like, that intermediary man almost.
Yeah. I mean, like, Bill wants, for the first time probably in Nick's life, Bill wants what Nick has, which is access to the absolute top echelon. He's the almost inside man, I think, of him, right? He plays the piano, he follows instructions, he doesn't ask questions, he performs blindfolded, but he has something that Bill wants, which is access to this, I have seen things, Bill. I've seen things that you've never thought of. It's like very enticing, even though he's warning him of danger. And then at the end, he goes, "Oh, no, you can't know about it." It's kind of like he's already enticed him in by the way he's talked about it. And I always think that that's the interesting thing about Nick Nightingale. And I saw one thing that somebody did on Instagram or somewhere where he was talking about the fact that he's the Nightingale, and the Nightingale's thing is to sing a song that draws people into the woods. And they did this whole sort of thing about the Nightingale as a bird and what it was meant to do, and using its song to draw people in. And then you never hear the Nightingale in the woods because they've flown off, and they're enticing more people or things into the woods. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting take, that this is the
That's a
guy who
very
basically,
interesting take.
yeah, he sings a song and he draws him in. This is the siren in Homer's Odyssey. This is the person who basically, look at him there, even the way it's lit, he looked demonic. You know what I mean? It's like, and then he does this really creepy thing with his fingers where he goes, I just play the piano. You know what I mean? Like, he does this really creepy thing. And in fact, I'd say Alan Cumming does it a bit later on. When Alan Cumming turns up, he's creepy the way he does his hand movements. And it's like, yeah, it certainly is. This is him being at his most enticing. And if you look around him, like you've been saying, the Christmas lights, the rainbow, it's all there. This is literally, and then you've got red on one, or purple on one side, blue on the other. It couldn't be more. This is more or less the pivotal moment of the entire film. This is him, fishing, I suppose you'd call it. You know what I mean? Trying to entice Bill to do something stupid.
Yeah. And this is where the amazing word fidelio comes in when they share the napkin. And I heard something, and I don't know if this is true or not, that if there was potential tinkering in the film, they actually changed some of what was written on these notes that were shared around throughout the movie. I don't know if that's true or not. I read that in a conversation that someone was having in a forum. But again, amazing scene. This is where we get to see Will taking that step into a place that he does not belong, a place that he is not aware of, in a layer that he will soon come to know more of. And that's where we slowly see him leaving. I love this shot because, again, we see the layer of detail that Kubrick went to being able to recreate New York in his own capacity. And I believe he was really trying to target Greenwich Village in Manhattan, which was known to be a seedier place, a place where all the late night music dive bars were, in these venues and costume shops. And now this is going to take, because what did Nick Nightingale's character say? You can't just get in. One, you need a password, and you need the right wardrobe, which ultimately takes them to Rainbow Rentals, which is, I think, one of the few times in this movie that Kubrick shows exactly what this movie is about, where he couldn't in other places. And as we go here, we see the famous Rainbow Rentals sign, him looking for a past owner of this to ultimately meet Milich, who is now the new owner and who is going to present what is some of the problematic core themes of this movie, and ultimately what Kubrick is trying to talk about as we all live in this world with eyes wide shut. And right here, it looks like you can see, if everyone can see this, it says under the rainbow, and it's this almost descent downward. And you even said it really well, like earlier in this call, the higher you go, you said something about the higher up you are, the lower you descend, right?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And I feel like he does the same here, even though Tom Cruise's character Will is not necessarily going geographically lower, and here he actually does. He is in this descent. As he goes higher, he's going deeper into the moral compass, deeper into what's taboo and bad. And I love this. Mr. Milich, a man that is, again, part of this apparatus. He might not be cut from the same cloth as the Omni ones, but he is someone that is of service to the Omni ones. He is someone that is bought this business, and what you'll come to see is the business could very much just be a facade. It could be in this dream world. And what's really interesting is, again, you see these lights, you see all of the same stuff you see in the reflections. And then we go inside, and again, we see a lot of the same stuff that Kubrick has been pulling through, these Christmas lights to great detail, Christmas lights always being in the frame. And this is where he's able to get that wardrobe that he needs to be able to enter this party. But things seem weird as we end up hearing this noise, and ultimately his daughter ends up surfacing, which it looked like she was with some other men. some other
Yeah.
end that looked like they were taking advantage. And like I was saying earlier, that this is really the only time that Kubrick speaks in like explicitly about what the core theme of this film is, and the only way that you should look at this movie is through the lens of what was happening more recently with the Jeffrey Epstein files, in this almost binding yearning, what's at the end of the rainbow, looking for someone that's underage, someone that's taboo. And in this case, Mr. Milich, which we come back to later when we return after the orgy scene, we see that he's switched up. And what's interesting, it's this conversation when we see Milich finds her daughter with these men, he's almost upset, but it seems very theatrical, very forced, almost as if he's putting on this show for Tom Cruise's character, who's a part of the dream world, who's not of the Omni One, who's someone that could potentially raise the red flag and put a stop to what he's doing behind the scenes. And what I love about this scene here, especially, and then I want to hear your thoughts, Chris, is she says something in Tom Cruise's ear, but Kubrick intentionally did not have the audience be able to hear that. And I've always been fascinated by what she could have said to Tom Cruise's character, Will Hartford. Was it something that was come back for more, to come figure out what it could look like if you come back here at another time? I don't know. What are your thoughts about this scene, Chris?
I think the ambiguity is the thing here. You know what I mean? It could be any number of different things. I mean, the way she says it is very seductive. It looks very seductive when she's doing it in his ear, but at the same time, it could be her saying what's been going on or something. Like, it is very kind of pantomimey, like you said, this whole scene. They walk in on her with those two blokes, it's like they're wearing like wigs and one of them's hiding in the cupboard. It feels almost like a stage sort of, like a comedic sort of Greek piece of comedy. You know what I mean? Like stage comedy. It looks incredibly weird, that whole scene. And then, as I said, then we get this kind of really creepy moment here where she's whispering in his ear, you know, and I don't know. I'll say one thing though. This is the girl who's in Deep Impact and also in with Tim Allen in Jungle to Jungle, just say it. And Milich, that guy, is, you know, Batman Begins. You know, when, this is interesting, when Christian Bale's character, Bruce Wayne, right, runs away in Batman Begins, he gives the jacket to a like old homeless man, gives his coat to an old homeless man. When he comes back as Batman, having been trained by whoever, right, he comes back and there's a guy who he looks down at and he goes, "Nice coat." That is the guy playing Milich in this film. Also, he's the bad guy from Taken 2.
Oh, wow. I didn't know he was
Just
the
wanted
bad guy
to-
taken.
Thought that I'd lighten it up a bit as well. You know what I mean? I thought, well, as soon as I watched this again, I was like, holy shit, it's the guy who was the bad guy in Taken 2, you know?
No, Kubrick is so good at casting people and finding the right people for this role. Honestly, I would say that Mr. Milich, he steals this whole scene and he drives this whole scene from start to finish, asking about his ailment early on, speaking to Mr. Hartford
His
as
hair,
the
innit?
resource that he is. Yeah. In the same way that he's a resource to the Omni Ones. He sees the same in Will, that he is a tool, something that provides some type of resource to these Omni Ones. And what I also think is interesting, and I don't know if this was what Kubrick was going for, but if you look in the background to all of these like mannequins in different costume, a lot of it speaks to, I feel like he's trying to say that this has been something that's been happening through society for thousands of years. This isn't a new concept. This isn't something where this taboo yearning for something that's at the end of this rainbow and you're only able to find it there. I don't know if Kubrick was going for that. Drop it in the comments. Let me know what you guys think he was trying to showcase here with these various costumes through different periods of time, but super fascinating. And we leave with this scene where she ultimately says something to him, and you can tell that he's off put by this. Anybody would be if you saw the imagery that Kubrick put on screen, which is really the only time he's explicitly speaking to what is running rampant in this omni social class. I love this shot, just Tom Cruise brooding. Who doesn't love a good Tom Cruise brooding shot?
Mate, I'm going to ask you now, because I don't know if you've got it as your next picture, but when he gives the taxi driver $100 bill and tears it in half.
And rips it.
What's your,
Yeah.
yeah, what's your thoughts on that? I found it strange that he was taking I mean, he seemed so low class when he turned up in a taxi to a swingers party when everybody else has got these massive luxury vehicles. But I found it really weird when he tore the $100 in half. I understood it to keep the guy there, but yeah, it was
also
really
comes off as like kind of cheap, right? It's
Yeah.
like if you really wanted him to stay there, it's like, you know, he has money. He's not short of money in any capacity, being a registered doctor working in Manhattan with his own private practice. So, and what's funny is like such a commoner way of him getting around Manhattan to ultimately going to this very opulent setting, which you see that no one else is arriving in a taxi, for that matter, needing to like buy this or rent this costume. And we see this here. It's everyone that's pulled up to this event, to this gate, is pulled up in a limousine. And a lot of these look like really amazing. What are those, Rolls Royces? Some of these here look like Rolls Royces. These are likely, I'm not sure what the make and manufacture of these cars are, but no one that's coming to this party is going to be coming into a taxi. And what's interesting is Kubrick plays on the geography of the elite class, the real elite, your real omni ones. They're not living inside Manhattan. And if they are, that is only a small residence to something a lot larger along these lines. And I don't know if you could actually find a resident like this in New York. I didn't look and spend time if there's any type of, you know, homes that are this opulent outside of New York and New Jersey. And there's some very wealthy New York and New Jersey, like, you know, smaller neighborhoods that surround Manhattan. But it's super fascinating because, to your point, I didn't pull that screen grab. I should have. But with the taxi driver, he pulls up, waiting, telling him to idle. And he's just sitting here, which I think is funny, considering like what is happening beyond those gates. The dude who's just a commoner, just chilling right outside there, these two men. Very funny scenario. And I think what's also really awesome about Kubrick is he has such good comedic timing. While it's not like overtly laugh out loud funny, everything is kind of comical, especially in this movie. Kubrick is not one to kind of stray away from the irony or how funny these characters are, or in this matter, how like Will is just outside of his own comfort zone in particular here. But I love this. I love the lighting. And if there's one thing we can see, it's Happy Holiday. And it looks like as we get closer to what is now the real world, the world of these Omni ones, there's something that we don't see in this imagery, and that's the Christmas lighting. That's the blue lighting. That's the stuff that imposes this concept of the dream world, the world that he inhabits, Will and Alice inhabit, and even these people at the party inhabit, but not here. He's slowly entering into what is now going to be the real world, the world that we live with our eyes wide shut to. In an amazing conversation where they ask for the password, he doesn't even show up in his outfit or in his wardrobe, and I don't even know where he has it at this point. He rented it. He's not carrying it. I don't know how he ultimately comes to wearing it. You know, which is a very interesting, I don't think, again, Kubrick, this is a Kubrick error, but it shows just how unequipped he is for this. And I doubt anyone else is having this type of a conversation as they enter in through these gates, you know?
No, that has brought that to my attention though, Brendan. I'm going to watch it differently now. Where the heck is his mask? It's not got it in his pocket, has he?
Yeah, he puts it on later, and he's still wearing the fake mask, right? The mask that Kubrick is talking about. This is the mask of the dream world. It's not the mask of the real world, the real mask that we all carry, the real mask of our deepest desires. And then we enter into this really opulent, I mean, this place looks sick. Despite obviously what this is all tied to, sick architecture. Drop in the comments if there's a place like this in the United States. I would love to know about it. There probably is something that's this beautiful, but very beautiful home. And then this is where we get our first opportunity of going into this real world, the real world being this home where there's the party. And even immediately once you're entered into this party, he stands out, likely because I bet everybody that walked through those doors was already masked and in their outfit. And I think this might be, so someone said it's under its coat, and he pulls it out of his pocket after he takes the coat when he enters. So that makes sense. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Cameron, for bringing that up.
It's a slim fit though. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, he looks good here. It doesn't look like he's wearing a costume here, but
Doesn't look
here it
like he's
does.
concealing a hood, does he? Doesn't look
Yeah.
like he's concealing. Like it's got to do. You'd have to
Yeah.
tuck it in.
Yeah. So this is where, of course, he enters in the party. And what I love about this and to break down the sequencing that Kubrick went through in this whole sequence here is he enters into this world where everyone's backs are to him. And if you know Kubrick, he was really focused on perspective, the 1 point perspective. What was the perspective of the protagonist? What was the perspective of what he was talking about? And in this moment, Tom Cruise enters into a place that he's not supposed to be, and he is walking up to the backs of these Omni ones, these people of this social class. And we see Nick Nightingale here, even looking away even more back to what is ultimately happening, playing his music. And it's this ritualistic, we have these women surrounded in a circle as this man walks by with what looks like something that is smoking. And as he smashes down his staff, a woman, they rise and they declothe and they go and branch off and grab men. But what I love about this is Kubrick will intentionally switch the perspective here. And in this podcast, again, you guys have to listen to Judge Movies episode 4, Eyes Wide Shut, because he talks about how Kubrick was working to this shot that is honestly masterful. If you think of all of the amazing Kubrick shots and the forced perspective and what he was trying to speak to, as this film progresses and in this sequence here, we ultimately get to see that perspective look back at the camera and look back, most importantly, at Will. But right now in this sequence, this is where Will is carrying the perspective of everyone else, watching what is unfolding before them as this party kicks off and slowly begins. But again, beautiful. And what's not here? No Christmas lights, none of the stuff from the dream world. Kubrick, by choice, made sure there was this really awesome delineation between the real world and the dream world.
I think it's interesting. They're all, as I said, all of these masks, it makes them, like the whole orgy masks is all uniform. It's expressionless. It's, their anonymity is their privilege, really, is the way I would put it. You know what I mean? These people, you can't tell who any of them are. Like you and I have debated just before we came on, you know what I mean? Who this person is here in this kind of a beaked mask, you know what I mean? In the center of shot. We assume it's Ziegler, but we can't be certain, you know what I mean? Yet for some reason, they all seem to know who he is, even behind his cheap mask that he got from Rainbow Costume Rentals,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I love this. And this is the shot as we see one of the Omni ones, the first one to be able to see that there is someone from the outside world. And this is likely Victor. This is someone that would know, right? Someone that's potentially at the top from their king's throne, this godly perspective as he looks down and addresses and nods to him. Right now, there's not a lot of noise made of this, but someone recognizes and knows that something's going on. It's just a great shot. Kubrick was such a master at coverage, and that's what I really love about him as a filmmaker. And Larry Smith talked about it in that interview that's on the Eyes Wide Shut Criterion version of how refreshing it was to work with Kubrick and to be able to have such intentionality behind every frame and sequencing out these frames, and like the amount of research that he put into making all of this stuff and being able to like light to it. And this was supposedly super hard to work in because they were not allowed to rig to anything inside this home. They would, to be able to like.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I think this was one of the harder places to light just because their inability to light and rig to the actual infrastructure and architecture.
There's a few pictures out there that I've seen BTS, but yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, super fascinating. And you said this about the mask, which does stand out against the rest of the mask, where this is a lot more ornate. When you look at the other masks, not that they're not ornate, but they're a lot more gaudy, I would say. Very gothic, very, they're not pleasing. And then you have his, and I believe this mask supposedly cost upwards of $10,000. This was something that I saw in a discussion as well, or it was a collection of masks that cost upwards of $10,000, but he went to great lengths of trying to make these Venetian style masks.
He paid $25 for it when he lost it. Do you remember at the costume shop? when he goes back and he hasn't got the mask, he has to pay
Oh, yeah.
$25. So
That's
it's like
funny.
dirt cheap.
Yeah. And this is where, sorry everyone, we had to blur this out for obvious reasons, but this is where he starts to go through this orgy sequence. And this is the infamous sequence where, if you've watched when it was originally released, this is where we talked about earlier in the stream, where they added these CGI bodies covering up the like sex that was happening on screen to be able to get that proper theatrical release. And I think Ranger said something earlier that likely, you know, Tom Cruise by contract had to have the movie released, which is why they saw this. But very interesting, as you can see, again, he's very punctuated, and look who's here in the back of frame looking towards them. You can see the eye lines of this in this scene particularly. These people, of course, don't know what's going on, but there's two that seem to be looming in the distance as Tom Cruise navigates this world. And this character, who we assume is the woman that was in the beginning of the movie in Victor Ziegler's office, or whatever that was, after they had sex and she ended up potentially ODing. This is her coming to rescue, knowing that who this is and how Will has infiltrated this world. But amazing imagery nonetheless, obviously, considering what is on screen, not the women in particular, but the architecture and what Kubrick was going through. And, you know, what's really interesting about this, where everyone was coming in for this steamy and lustful film, this sequence, which doesn't last very long, and they spent a long time shooting, is very heathenistic, and it's honestly not even attractive when you look at the way that these men are having sex with this women. And what's interesting is there's certain stuff throughout this sequence as well where he can't explicitly speak to what he actually wants to show in this concept of he obviously had to get women of age, because you can't simulate that would be considered that's not something that he should have on screen or can be on screen in a film and get theatrical release. But there's places throughout this sequence when you go back and rewatch it that's super interesting. It almost looks like as the people don't even know how to have sex. And there's this really awesome shot where you can see this woman almost coaching through the girl, standing over her as if this is how you do it. This is how you pleasure a man. And it's just very interesting. Kubrick trying to find creative liberties to be able to speak to what happens at these parties in the quote unquote Omni one, and where morality is no longer here, and Will probably surprised. And I know the original time I saw it, it's not that there's not a dilemma here morally, but it's to the level of the guilt that Will's character carries throughout the remainder of the movie. It only makes sense that what Kubrick's trying to show here is one thing, and it points to one thing only. And that's what we know today through the Epstein documents and all of this stuff, that Kubrick was trying to speak to these extravagant masquerade parties that have been happening for centuries. And this happens to be one that Will has fallen into, and he's seeing himself what is at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah, you're right about those sex scenes. They are almost comedic in terms of the way. I thought of Ridley Scott's Napoleon when he's just going for it. You know what I mean? There's no pleasure or anything like that. It's almost subjective in its time. Or it's very subjective. It's almost trying to be. I'm trying to think of the word. Almost S&M like in terms of the way that they behave. You know what I mean? In this party. That's what I think.
And some of it's not logical. There's like two girls that are going down on each other, but they're wearing masks.
They're wearing masks. The kisses as well when they're wearing masks seems very odd, you know?
Yeah. And it's these masks that are really, very symbolic, 100%.
No, I mean, it's a symbolic kiss rather than natural kissing.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the way that the masks just touch. No.
Yeah. No, that's super true. And what's super interesting here is one thing that we haven't seen for quite some time as he's been navigating this world is this blue light, the dream world coming in from the outside into this place that's warm and real, and what he's actually seeing. And this is this moment where he gets pointed out and he says, "You are not safe here. You have been warned, essentially. Be careful of how far you go." And she ultimately gets whisked away and he enters back into the main space. But I love that Kubrick now is dealing with this whole, there is the blurring of the worlds as the dream world and the real world collide. And I find that super fascinating. And again, it's just amazing use of light, using every part of the filmmaking medium to be able to speak to this movie.
There's a thing that I found really interesting that was in Kubrick's version of Traum Novel. He's highlighted, apparently, one passage that he's highlighted is as he moves deeper into this strange world, he thinks back with affection to the stable world of his everyday realities. And that's this point right here in the Traum Novel, right during the sexual orgy. It says, as he moves deeper into this strange world, he thinks back with affection to the stable world of his everyday realities. And that is one that Kubrick highlighted in his own copy. And I think that's pretty much the best way to sum up this whole scene that you're just talking about. As he's now in the midst of it all, he's looking back at what he saw as his own life and his real life, or what he believed to be his real life, that blue light dream world, and he wishes for it now because he's seen the reality of the world that he's been subject to.
Dude, there's so much
philosophical.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I love it. And this is what goes back to this Kubrick's master shot. As we talked about earlier on, Kubrick comes in where everyone's back to him. But now Will's character enters into this place as everyone waits for him, all eyes on him. And if you think about what I was talking about with that perspective that Kubrick's always trying to imply, this objective look into the world where no one is bad or good. It's up to us as the audience and the people consuming the movie to make that decision. But here, Kubrick, if you can think of how he wants the audience to feel, and if you think of all of his movies and what he's been trying to show, The Dark Star, The American Journey, Man Built on Violence, what man is capable of, this is where finally Kubrick switches that perspective around to look at him and to potentially look at who is Will, the manifestation of Kubrick himself, for all of this evil, for all of the monsters in this room to now look back at him. This is just a great shot. Not only is it just great like craftsmanship and composition, but he's building on the momentum that he's been having as we've been looking through the eyes of Will. Now we get to see what looks back at him.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And what's cool is it ultimately shifts as he comes up. Will obviously has this conversation. They make him dethrone. And in this moment, he gets a savior. And this is where now we see the perspective shift upwards into this godlike moment, the savior being this model, or who is it? Hard to say, but it's this perspective shift that Kubrick does here again. We come in as the world's looking at him. Now the world's looking at the out. They were going to take him down for knowing too much, but he's been saved by this figure who ultimately, die due to the actions. She is the tide, if you will. She is the exit point for Will. But I love the way Kubrick uses this sequencing here, shot to shot, to be able to tell the story of him entering and then leaving and then ultimately being back in the dream world. And there's this blue cast. It's like the gate. His way of exiting is through her. She saved him. Here's the blue world. This is where he's supposed to go back to. And what's interesting as well, and you were kind of speaking to this, the higher you go, the lower you go type concept. Again, the dream world is up. It's going out of the depths of the elite into a certain capacity and this godlike look upwards. I don't know. This one's me kind of just being playful there, but I really love this imagery. And again, this 1 point perspective looking back at this exit point, their savior, or his savior, I should say.
Yeah, that's brilliant, man.
Yeah. Just
really like
blue. Yeah, Cameron said that as well, and that's so spot on. And then it takes him back. I mean, that's that sequence that was so spoken to, especially in the lead of this film and afterwards. What's funny is that sex orgy scene that I believe, again, took a lot of time for Kubrick to be able to manufacture, shoot, bring to life, and bring into the story, was only 2 minutes of runtime during that entire film, which is insane. It's like so much is this. Yeah.
Go on.
No, go for it.
Is this the scene, the one that you've just gone on to now? Is that the scene where when he comes back, he turns the Christmas tree off? He turns the lights off. Now he's seen the end of the rainbow. I wonder if it is, because there is a scene where literally we see him walk in, and it's exactly this angle, and he walks around and he turns the lights off. It's almost as if, right, no more rainbow. You know what I mean? It's almost like now I've seen exactly how far the rainbow goes. I'm gonna plunges into the blue light. I'm happy to accept the blue pill, I suppose they would say in the Matrix.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to rewatch that sequence. I don't remember him turning off the light, but that's a really good point. That's almost his admission of coming back into this dream world and having more realization of what the real world is and not being able to separate the two. And this is where they're completely bathed in that blue light, where Alice's dreams are too real, simulating essentially what Will had just experienced, this collision of the real world and the dream world. And I also love this like warmth right here. He didn't go completely blue as if he's back in the dream world. This warmth here, and I don't know if Kubrick was going for that as Will enters back in from this real world, right? If this is almost the gateway from where he came from. I'll have to rewatch that scene because I don't quite remember the blocking. Yeah, but at least that's my initial thought. Yeah.
He does turn the lights off because I've got it here in two sequences. So he does turn the light off. So he turns the Christmas tree off as soon as he walks into his living room.
Yeah.
And then this is where she now tells him about, like, this bit here is where she tells him about having that dream, right? So this is now her talking about, she talked about a fantasy that she had. Now she's talking about a dream that she had.
Yeah.
And it's where she said that she had lots of men like sleeping with her and everything like this, right?
Yeah, very similar to what Will would have just seen and experienced coming home from that party. And it's just a great way for the way the film that started and ultimately the turning point and what she said in her dream, for him to be plunged into this world to ultimately then have this come full circle and to have been dealt with the reality. Because now this is where Will starts to go off the rails, right? We just saw that, assuming with what we know now and what Kubrick was trying to speak to with this elite class and what's been running rampant, if you will. Now he thinks, and this goes into the how naive Will is a character and how short-sighted he is, because for the remainder of this film, he essentially thinks he can fix it. Because again, he has not told Alice what he just experienced, what he just saw, where he was. He's just returning home. And they're going to carry on from their life for all that Alice knows until ultimately he fully divulges later on. But this brings him into this whole sequence of now trying to find Nick Nightingale. And what does Kubrick introduce right as he gets back into this dream world? The continuation of Christmas lights and this dream world that they inhabit, not the real world, this hyper-normalized manufactured world. And this is where he goes to think that he can solve the problem in a day. Literally, in a day, he tries to feel that if I talk to Nick Nightingale or if I can confront the powers that be, that I can make this okay. And this is where we have the awesome Alan Cunning scene. And even in this, Nick Nightingale's gone, right? He left at 5 a.m. And through this whole scene, you can tell that he's nervous, as if his one job is to shoo Will away or to say, yeah, sure, he was bruised up. And even at the end, you can see that he's kind of nervous, right? Saying, okay, I did my job. I told him what happened, right? And now he's gone. But very fascinating scene. Again, one of these almost ancillary scenes that Kubrick weaves in so well. This one's definitely a lot more plot driven than some of the earlier ones. But it showcases, one, Kubrick's ability to just direct, bring actors into this world and have them really showcase to the story. But really awesome
He's
sequence.
creepy though, isn't he? Alan Cumming.
He's super creepy.
And when he does that bit where he asks him about whether the big men, and he goes like that, big men, doesn't he? Right, you would go like this, but he does it like that. He goes big men. He moves his arms about like that, and I always found that was strange. Even that was almost like pseudo-sexual, I suppose you'd call it.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is, I don't know. Oh no, you go on to the next thing, because I don't. There's a point where when he goes home, he checks in on his daughter's bedroom. You know what I mean? On Helena, and she's asleep in the blue, bathed in the blue light and everything like this. And I think your guy said it on the podcast. In the background is a teddy bear. Remember, we've talked about teddy bears in Kubrick. It's a common symbol. It's there. It's this idea of faux comfort and, clinging onto something that's not real. And he says about how the teddy bear has got a rainbow on its chest and stuff like that. And it's right in the deep back. And it's another one of those things of this is the end of that rainbow. And also welcoming in this teddy bear thing, like we were saying about the Epstein potential, things like that. That's another symbol that's kind of pointing towards that, even if you look for it. And I don't think that
Yeah.
Kubrick doesn't put these things into his scenes for no reason, you know?
Oh, 100%. 100%. That's where, again, there's no resolve with Nick Nightingale. He obviously hears that he looked bruised up. He goes to Milich, returns. This is when Milich makes a potential proposition to him, and we see those men that were with his daughter returning. Now it seems like the relationship is fine, pointing to the potential theatrics of what we saw in the original sequence at Rainbow Rentals. And yeah, I just love how Kubrick has this almost series of events that shows that the Omni ones, the social class above him, is always one step ahead, and how many resources are at their discretion. And what I love the most is Will thinks that he can just face the elite, go back to where this party was, and that he'll be able to get the answers and stock them in their tracks, and nothing will come of this. And I love this scene because he goes to the gate, and then we see this car slowly drive down, almost as if they were waiting for Will this whole time to be able to come back and have this letter. It takes a matter of seconds for this to ultimately happen with him returning to the gates. And what's really interesting, and they made note of this in the podcast, and I really liked the perspective on this, but the idea of these socialites, the people that are not of this class, driving the Range Rovers, and the real one driving these more discreet vehicles of which he ultimately pulls up in. It's just such an interesting thing where this character who's dealt with such I'm just reading this comment. This scene made me think this isn't actually his daughter, just young enough to be his daughter. That's what Cameron said about Mr. Milich's daughter.
Milich's
Yeah,
daughter.
that could honestly.
The second time that he goes back to Rainbow costume rental, like, we see this transactional side of Milich, don't we? You know, where he's basically said, you know, when you're going to call the police on these two guys? Yeah, but we came to an arrangement. It's like, you know, we see that side of him. And also when he walks into Rainbow Rentals, there's an interesting one that I noticed. He's shot coming in through the door into the gated bit when they walk in, and he's shot with the word rainbow backwards. So it's almost like he's now gone over the rainbow. I know I'm going into symbols and all this kind of stuff, but that I saw that and I was like, oh, that's really cool. We're now over that point, and everything is going backwards almost. Structurally, we're now going to all the places that he went to in the first half, and they're changed somehow. Everything is now much more clear to him. That's what I saw it as anyway, structurally.
Yeah, I think that's 100% spot on.
Like, even here, they have his name, and it's like, how the heck did they know his full name? Dr. William Thingy. You know what I mean?
And Cameron makes a really good note about their relationship, more particularly the way that they hold hands, which implies that maybe they're not that father-daughter dynamic that, and you know, they don't even look like they could even, and I don't know if this is the case, but they don't even look like they can maybe even be biological.
No.
That one's more a little bit harder, I would say, to say, but I love this character. I love the way that he shoots this on each side of the gate. I thought that was super fascinating.
Inside and outside.
Again, the dream world, the real world, this degree of separation, even though Will is of that higher class, he has the money, he has the job, he is still not let through the gate, especially after what happened.
Does he break the 180 there or not? No, he doesn't, does he? No,
it's hard to say with his eye line right there, right? It looks like it could.
It looks like he's looking directly at us.
Yeah, it does.
We go from a POV shot to an over the shoulder.
Yeah, that's super fascinating.
Look at us, film school students.
And this is like, you know what's interesting too about this final sequence in the movie, as he slowly tries before it goes back into night. There's not a lot of daytime in this film. There's not a lot of time spent outside of, I believe, when he's at his doctor's office in this. That's really the only two times that we see these characters navigating the day we're in. Ultimately, then he goes back, right, to where he was with that prostitute, revisiting her, bringing a package to find out that she has HIV, I believe is what she was diagnosed with, and she's kind of assuming that potentially they had sex, or maybe not, but just wanted to share that information. And again, we see the Christmas tree, the same lighting. There is that same chemistry, and I think this is the closest that Will's character ever got to really close intimacy with another character in this film. You know,
he was a lot more forthright.
Yeah.
Only this time, the first time he was kind of cowering in the corner, and this time he's a lot more forthright with her. Like he couldn't keep his hands off her until she tells him to sit down and gives him this
Yeah.
bad news. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
It's
this
like he's
is where-
changed. You know, he's got
That's
to this
so
point
true.
where he's very. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was just agreeing. I'm saying that's super true.
He's gone from being this guy that was really petrified to now he's been at the upper echelons. It's like, this feels like a lot more of me. I can do this now to sort of get the other thing out of my brain almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah. What do you think Kubrick was going on with this apple right here? Very suggestive. That's all I'm going to say. Very suggestive apple.
Is it an avocado?
Could be an avocado. And then we get to a really awesome
This
sequence
guy.
in this movie where he is ultimately getting tailed by someone. And I love this. This is where the piano comes in full force, and just Kubrick's brilliance with music and having this man that surfaces and is following him, is following Will, and was likely having someone follow him this whole time, which is why they were likely ready for him to come. They knew he was coming because there is always a peering eyes, someone that's watching over him, especially after these events. And what a great way to just feel that this man, who has an awesome look, by the way,
Cool as hell.
they're always watching. And now that he is known, now that he is entered into their world, he is always going to be of watch. And even in this dream world, he can't get away from the real world now. And this is where it's slowly blurring more and more. And I love this idea of, you know, abstraction here. They've entered into a place where they're not supposed to have this pronounced of a position, but because of Will and what he knows, now we get to see that a lot more. And again, we have the same stuff that Kubrick's been playing with: the Christmas lights, the look, the slick down streets, the night. This is where everything's converging into one melody, one dance, and really awesome.
Yeah.
Ren Miller, I wonder what he has going on with that too. And then we go, this is where
Nightingale, Wren, we've got some birds in this. Go on.
Yeah. This is where we ultimately learn about the passing of the model that we saw earlier that speaks to a potential drug overdose. And what's super interesting here is you can see it says something about Leon Vitelli right here, that fashion designer is likely what it's saying, Leon Vitelli rumored. And Leon Vitelli is the man who was Kubrick's longtime assistant, the assistant to the director, and also is the man who played the masked individual in the red cloak, and is symbolizing kind of being the order of this whole thing. And who knows what Kubrick was ultimately trying to speak to here, having Leon Vitelli. It very much sounds like an Italian designer. Maybe there was something more sinister. If you listen to the podcast, they make a really like interesting claim about Leon Vitelli and him being someone that has this potential taste for what's at the end of the rainbow, and was kind of a, you know, someone in Kubrick's orbit that maybe Kubrick helped through those moments. I don't know how much I believe that to be true, but I love that little Easter egg of Leon Vitelli's name in here. But this is where he learns about the overdosing of an ex-beauty queen found dead in a hotel. But to him, did she actually die from that circumstance, or something far more mysterious?
Mm-hmm.
And there she is.
I like how you've blurred this, you know, Brendan. Honestly, if this was shown on a plane, this film, it'd be 20 minutes long because with all the edits.
Oh yeah, 100%. And Cameron
Done a
says,
good job.
"Hey, that's Canva for you." And what's Cameron said, "Lucky to be alive" is a headline on the newspaper. That was super overt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Talking
it's
about Drew.
And again, this is where, and something about this scene that I heard in what was supposed to be in Kubrick's version, if there was a monologue, this was supposed to be a place where there was supposed to be a monologue in particular that really spoke to this scene. I haven't read the script that has that narration, that Kubrick wanted to have in this film, but I know that in particular that was supposed to be part of this scene here. And again, this is the woman earlier in the film that he ultimately saved, and then she saved him, and now she's dead. She was, as we saw, the outpoint for him being in that real world and that party that it was not supposed to be. She was the offering to let someone like Bill or Will be able to enter back into this world, enter back into his dream world. Unfortunately, there had to be a sacrifice, if you will, and she was that. She knew what she was doing. And just a great scene. Like, great coverage. Love the look of this. This is one of the fewer, more monochromatic scenes that's not littered with a lot of different colors. Again, this is the real world. There's none of that Christmas, imagery going on here. He was going to show this is what happens when you deal with the real world, when you deal with the Omni ones, this class, if you will. And that's what takes us to one of, if not the best scenes of the movie, the confrontation of Victor, calling him up to be able to have this conversation, to stop beating around the bush and ultimately say, what you saw is not what you saw. This distinguishing of, do not continue to go down this path because there is nothing stopping harm coming your way. And it's a really awesome scene. And you spoke about this earlier, the lengths of which they went to shoot this scene. And it's not super complex in its blocking, but to Kubrick, so much weight was put on this, and him speaking to what we know, the only perspective in which you should look at this movie and what is at the end of the rainbow, and Victor being a part of this world and being the mouthpiece for these Omni ones, and the one that allowed Will to be able to enter into this world and likely escape this world. But it's just a great scene, and I love the coverage here, and I love, as it progresses, we can see this blue light, we can see the Christmas imagery, and here more than ever, it's more pronounced as it blurs the lines. The dream world meets the real world. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is, I always took note of those big portraits looking down on him, like American presidents or something like that. They're all the eyes staring down at him when they're doing this scene. I always found that was like a power thing. And he's also got this massive ship on his window, hasn't he, as well? Like, I'm the captain now. You know what I mean? He's got this, like, all of the stuff in this scene. And then this bit when he's got his hands on his shoulders and he says something like, people die every day, don't they? You know that. And, like, it's just this kind of, like, patting him on the back and saying, yeah, now go fuck yourself. Sorry for swearing. But you know what I mean? It's kind of like that. He's kind of saying, you go off and live your life now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is the end
Really
bit. It's such a great scene.
Yeah. This ties it all together, and this is the scene that takes them back into this final sequence of him coming home to see the mask that he took and rented from Rainbow Rentals, now on the pillow. They infiltrated his home, washed in blue, saying that we can even get into your home, that even your family, your daughter, we have access to them. And what's really interesting, and I heard this, is that a lot of the reasons why Will gets swept up into this is because in the beginning, the Omni ones, that elite class, wants his wife. But now that Will knows that Omni ones, the elite class, they want his daughter. And this is where we start to see that perspective shift in what they know, and ultimately how much they're able to infiltrate now into this dream world, this world that they live in. And this is where, funny photo, but Will ultimately breaks down and divulges to the details to Alice what ultimately happened, what he saw, and the horrors that are at bay and what's playing out. So then that brings them to what they do now. But this is where the blue light, especially as the film progresses, it's at its strongest. Because if you remember early in the movie when they're in their room at night, and again, the lights are off here, the blue is not coming into this room so strong, but here it just takes over the scene where they're in this dream world and trying to escape. But little do they know, or little does Alice know, but what he knows is that they're no longer safe and that he can no longer continue on this quest through his naivety of trying to solve the problem. There's nothing he can do. He's seen too much. His eyes are no longer shut. They're wide open.
Who do you think put that mask there? Is my question
I don't know.
to you, because I've always questioned it. Because she wakes up and it doesn't seem like she understands what's going on when he's breaking down and then saying he'll tell her everything, you know?
And Cameron even said this, the ambiguity is so good here. It was so long to tell if she found the mask and is going to confront him with it or if they put it there, but then she never freaks out about a mask on his pillow, which is true.
Mm.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, there's so much going on here. And Alice, you know, interesting enough, it's like in this final sequence of the movie, Alice is the one that's, you know, you do see her kind of distraught and crying and coming to terms with ultimately the potential of having to give over their daughter to be able to kind of put this at bay. But she's the one that is the navigating force in this final sequence, even here when, you know, like, what do they do now? It's Will that's coming to Alice for answers. It's not the other way around. It's this almost paradigm shift into the male hierarchy within a marriage itself. It's Alice, I did this and now I don't know what to do. And he never even did anything. He never cheated, I guess, in a way. You could say maybe being in those circumstances is a form of cheating, but now it's Will looking for answers, and what do they do now? And her answer that is very famous to kind of underscore and end this movie is to enter back into the dream worlds with eyes wide shut. But here in this, what's so perfect is it's a day with their daughter, and where do they take the daughter? To the toy store, and what is more emblematic of children? Toys. And in this final shot where we see the daughter kind of go off and potentially be whisked off by the higher powers that be, and for their final conversation, something that Kubrick carried through a lot of his films, and most particularly Shining, this idea of the child, the concept, the bear. That is what Helen is, this concept of a child. And we see that in The Shining, in that infamous shot of that man in a bear's costume who is like doing oral to that man, the Omni-Man in that room. And Kubrick doesn't spend a lot of time on that shot, but it speaks so much to the core themes, to the violence that's carried by man. And I really love this final scene. And what is a better way to punctuate in this dream world? Kubrick showing these characters inhabiting the place of a child as potentially their child is passed off. Or taken away.
Yeah. Well, because what is it? I mean, teddy bears are like mass-produced, you know, faux comfort. You know what I mean? It's not real comforting. It's that's what I was saying earlier. And I think that in that next shot that you just had, you know, you've got her with tigers behind her, and then you've got the little girl walking off with a teddy bear or something like that in it. You know what I mean? And they're taking it. And it's one of these where it's like they both turn around and just pretend to close their eyes to what they've just done, something horrible. That's how I read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a really good point with the mass produce. Yeah. That's super fascinating.
It's kind of like that. You've talked about hypernormalization all the way through this, and it's the Adam Curtis documentary that always gets me. And it's that thing of wrapping yourself in this sort of comfort of not knowing. Well, that's what the teddy bear is. You know what I mean? It's faux comfort. It's something that's not really there. And Kubrick places them all over the place. Usually after the film's darkest moments, darkest revelations, you usually get this scene of a very innocent, childish, you know, object, I suppose it is an object. It's not a state, is it? Innocence. It's an object in this teddy bear thing. You know what I mean? And the fact that we have it with the prostitute, the fact that when we see Domino, she's got this sort of tiger behind her, this teddy tiger, I suppose you'd call it. It makes me think that even as an adult, you know, the adult knowledge that she's got and how adult her profession is and everything like that doesn't erase the child that she is inside. You know, you've got all of that going on. That was how I saw it anyway. And that's how this scene is so important to this whole thing. Plus, they have all different things that are in there. There's the magic circle game that's just behind them as they walk in on a big red background, you know, and it's all reminiscent of what we've just seen. It's almost like these reminders are all around him of the night that he's just had or the dream that they've just had. Everything is now culminating in this. Everything we've seen throughout this film is throughout this. Got the lighting, got the rainbows, got the teddy bears, got the things. Everything is reminiscent of the night we've just had, of the tram novel we've just seen. So I see.
Yeah. That's so well said, Chris. And this is the end of the movie. And obviously Alice has her famous line of, what do we do now? And let's just go home and fuck, and let's have eyes wide shut, and let's continue on with our lives in the safety, and how thankful we are that
nothing worse is happening. And it's such an amazing encapsulation of just the commoner experience, the people that don't live in it. Sometimes it's better to just turn our heads and continue on than to dig deeper, and the potential horrors and what can ultimately play out the moment you open your eyes. And Kubrick, he was operating on another level with this movie, and I love the imagery throughout this film. Just some of the best like filmmaking that I've seen. And that's why we really wanted to talk about this movie tonight. And hopefully we shared some new concepts and things for you guys to be able to look into. And something that we want to leave off with is some fun trivia, one of which is definitely spend the time looking at the original Blu-ray versus the Blu-ray that came out more recently from Criterion. There's a big debate about which one's better, which one looked better. I actually really like the Criterion version. I think it shows the granularity and the film structure of that movie way better than the Blu-ray that came out years ago. I actually just recently rewatched it today just to be able to refresh what it looked like, and they put so much work into that, and it's awesome that Larry Smith was able to be on this film again after so many years, wondering if he would ever get the chance to fix the problems with the original release. So that is Eyes Wide Shut, guys. We did a really long scene by scene, and we spent a lot of time talking about the themes. To just run through some trivia here. Record-breaking shoot. We guys talked about this. Holds the Guinness Book World Records. 400 days of production. 2 years almost of shooting. Notorious dozens of takes. Kubrick really put a lot of time into this movie, along with the rest of the team, to be able to bring Eyes Wide Shut to life, and for good reasons. Intense secrecy. I thought this one was super interesting that Kubrick, like Nolan and other contemporary filmmakers, the lengths that they go in which to not allow the script to circulate. Even Tom and Nicole, who were married at the time, had to return their scripts to the studio every night and were not allowed to discuss these scenes outside of rehearsals.
That's nuts. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Super crazy. And I'm
He
gonna
just wanted to completely control their whole relationship, didn't he, through on this film?
Oh, and that goes to the thing that we were talking about, Chris, the whole idea of like supposedly throughout this production, Scientology, this was at a time where Tom Cruise was at the height of his involvement in Scientology, right? And supposedly this was at the period where Tom Cruise was reconsidering his involvement with Scientology, especially being Nicole Kidman. And again, these are just stories. We don't know if this actually happened, but it seemed like there was a potential for this movie to actually be his exit point. But Scientology instead sent a lot of their people to be there, and every morning before production, Cruise had to do his e-reading and his whole deal with Scientology, and there was already a lot of stress around that, which could have culminated to potentially their relationship not working out, as this film was already a pressure pot itself, examining their marriage. Now they had Scientology potentially breathing down their necks. It seemed like something, not only the secrecy of this production, but those that were involved in the stress. Definitely an interesting one.
Yeah.
We talked about this.
Up Nicole and Tom. You heard it here first.
Most likely. I mean, who else would be able to withstand that? The orgy scene. We talked about this one. Professional dancers, models taking 2 weeks to shoot. The original cut was much more explicit and had to be digitally altered. We all have the original cut now, which is great, in having these cloak figures obscuring the sexual activity. The method in madness. Kubrick had the actors rehearse for months before shooting. He would often change dialogue and scenes on the fly, rewriting throughout production. The famous argument scene between Cruise and Kidman was reportedly rewritten and shot numerous times.
Wow.
And that was, Kubrick taking these scenes, editing them, workshopping them, and then bringing back them to production and shoot through the scenes again. I don't even think people, Nolan probably couldn't even do that today if he wanted to,
No. I mean, I know that they're right in certain films. There's certain films I've worked on where you get in sort of blue and then green and then whatever, pink, different versions throughout the production. But I can't imagine that being at the rate that you were talking about with The Shining and Jack Nicholson, where it's 5, 6 different ones during the day. You know what I mean? You're getting different ones at lunchtime from the ones you got in the morning. That is just bizarre. And
I wonder
you
if
know,
Kubrick like capped his days. If he was like, all right, since we're going to be this hands-on and this hard, it's 12-hour days, and once we hit 12, we'll come back tomorrow. He's working like everyone's coming to the same studio, working in the same spot. It's not like he's going on location, especially for a movie like this in particular. It's all like built out in the same area. I wonder what his like schedules look like. I doubt that they were super long. I bet he wasn't trying to go into overtime. I don't know how much of a concept that was for European labor at that time, but
there's a
I'd be
great
curious.
video. There's a great video of him moaning about British film crews constantly having to go and have tea breaks. Have you ever seen that one?
I have. And then he never understood why they had to
Yeah.
have so many tea and cigarette breaks throughout the day.
It's genius. It's one of the, and he's moaning, and then apparently the first AD gets a kick off and swears, and he goes, "All right, Terry," like that. It's one of the coolest Kubrick moments I've seen on film.
Yeah, it's super
Yeah.
cool. The soundtrack, Kubrick used a haunting waltz from Dmitri. You can say that. Shostakovich's
Shostakovich's Jazz Suite.
Yeah. As a recurring motif, he also incorporated, how do you say
Georgi
that, Chris?
Ligeti. Georgi Ligeti.
Choral work, creating an eerie, dreamlike atmosphere throughout the film. We talked about this, how amazing
Yeah,
the
dude.
score and music, his
It's
selection.
eerie as hell. It's eerie as hell. I mean, we've loved it because we've been able to advertise this by putting on loads of really cool music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about this soundtrack.
It's so good. Christmas lights, all those Christmas lights visible throughout the film had to stay up for over a year during the extended shoot, frustrating some London residents whose homes were used for exterior shots.
Yeah, that's
I love
Londoners for you. That's Londoners for you.
That would be
Christmas.
anybody. Nervous Warner Brothers, the studio grew increasingly anxious as the shoot dragged on and costs mounted. They had little idea what Kubrick was actually creating since he kept everything so secretive and he wouldn't show them footage, which I love that. Again, he went to great lengths, even hiding it from the executives.
I mean, at that time in 1999, Warner Brothers, I've just Googled it now. They were producing the Iron Giant, The Matrix. Like, they were producing some massive, massive films. You know what I mean? Matrix was huge. You know, and again, we talked about Blast from the Past that year as well was another Warner Brothers one with Brendan Fraser in it. There was so much massive stuff coming out of them.
Yeah, Blast from the... Yeah. Warner Brothers was huge at that time. I mean, they're still huge now, right? But at that time, their output, and this being one of the movies, one of the many movies that came out in 1999. It's awesome that Kubrick was in a position.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Go for it.
No, this and The Matrix being out at exactly the same time is absolutely nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Given the themes that they were dealing with, given the things that they were dealing with, dreams and other worlds, and not being, not everything that you see is real. It was a crazy time in the cinema. People were getting existential.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have Harvey Keitel. He was replaced and was originally cast as Victor Ziegler, but was replaced by Sidney Pollack after a few weeks of shooting. Reporting varies whether Keitel quit or Kubrick fired him, but creative differences were cited, which Sidney Pollack is a way better fit than Harvey Keitel in my opinion. So that honestly, I think is a dub there. The piano player, the character of Nick Nightingale, the piano player at the orgy, went through multiple casting changes during production, with his role being reshot several times with different actors.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'd love to see the others.
Yeah, me too. No improvisation from Tom, unlike some directors who encourage improvisation. Kubrick demanded Cruise deliver lines exactly as written, leading into those infamous multiple takes to achieve that precise tone and delivery he wanted.
Wow.
And he was very notorious for that. If he was going to write the script, he wanted to make sure it was said his way. But guys, we were in for a long one. We went 4 hours, Chris, on this. So I really appreciated
Right.
everyone's time with this movie. I hope that you left with finding some really interesting things to look at as you go back and watch this film. Again, make sure to look at all of the source material. I'm going to hold that up again. Get the new Criterion Collection film. It's awesome. They did a really good job of putting the supplementaries together. I even recommend buying the original Blu-ray. Also awesome. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Also awesome. Highly recommend getting that if you have not seen it. You can get this awesome Warner Brothers book. It's super cool. It has both the original book and the script in it. And then look out for Conversations with Filmmakers. Really awesome as well. That is just a great way to be able to study these movies. And, you know, we want to talk more about this. And we really appreciate for everyone being around for the technical difficulties. We're going to spend time fixing that, making sure
Get it
that
right.
we get all, dialed in. This is only our second one. And we're only going to get better from here.
Yeah, and sorry about the 3 F words, 2 of which came from me and 1 of which came from Brendan quoting the source material. So I'll take the hit on that one.
Yeah. Well, guys, I know. What is the next one, Chris? It's your pick.
Do you know what? I'm considering doing The Deer Hunter, but I know that there's other really cool films as well that people are talking about. So we'll let them know by, what should we say, Brendan? During the week, we'll let them know by like Tuesday.
Yeah, but we'll definitely let them know by Tuesday.
Put it out on our socials what we're going to do, because I've got a few ideas. But yeah, let's say potentially The Deer Hunter.
Yeah. Who loves The Deer Hunter? Make sure to drop that in the comments. Definitely more. Cameron, Steven, those that were a part of this call, thanks so much for tuning in. We're always trying to get better at these, and we love that the community showed up. We had people sitting here for Chris listening for 4 hours, and Cameron put a really awesome note that
Good man.
it took him 27 years to watch this movie for the first time. Glad I watched it and also got to follow up with the conversation. Keep them coming. We really appreciate that. And
It's great fun, guys.
there's so many movies. Make sure to drop in the community if there's any movie you guys want us to cover, whether it's new, old, obscure, commercial, doesn't matter. That's what the film hangs for. Make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitch. We're going to continue to make those better places for us to speak to these movies. Go watch Eyes Wide Shut. Amazing film. Rest in peace, Kubrick. And guys, we'll catch you on the next film hang. And we just came shy of 4 hours by 3 minutes. That's a virtual high five, Chris. Let's get it. Let's get it.
Wait, you're on my right. High five.
All right, y'all. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.